Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the November 10th Special Finance and Audit Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. I particularly want to welcome all of the many staff here who have been busily preparing for the season where all the information is placed before Council, and we have to make those decisions that obviously have significant consequences for the city. Our clerk this morning is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Finance and Audit Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. As the province is now in Phase 3 of the reopening plan, question period has been reinstated for those in attendance for agenda items only. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. And at the start of question period, I will call up any of those who've signed up to the podium to address Council. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry, we have none. A motion for adoption of the agenda, please. Moved Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favour? Any opposed? Motion carries. I'd like to ask Mr. Rudolph, our CAO, if he could give us a couple of minutes, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Just to briefly reintroduce the day, I know Ms. Mercer will coordinate the conversation as we walk through the slide deck and so forth. But so as you know, this is we're getting closer to the culmination of a number of months of work. The budget process starts really in the spring, especially for the capital projects, and we had that time with you back in May and June when we reviewed some of the capital projects with you, and you set some priorities in that area. Since that time, business plans were prepared. You had those presentations over the last week, which sort of the current state of the union in terms of all the departments, the opportunities, some of the challenges. You know, just the context of all this is the municipality, as we know, and we celebrate, for a large part, is growing. And with growth in population and growth in footprint, that is growth in development, comes an expansion of our need for positions, for resources and services, and those demands are there. So we can anticipate every year that we will be coming to Council with identifying areas where we feel we're vulnerable or we need to address some of the staffing issues that we have. So those are the positions that are, for the most part, in this package. The other thing that's happening, and we're in the middle of it still, is the impacts of COVID. So there are inflationary impacts. I know current inflation rates are over 3, between 3 and 4, and even higher in some commodities. So those are putting pressure on things. There's supply chain issues with us. Some of our projects that we're hoping to get done may not get totally done on time because of materials. We have one example of 2 fire trucks that are sitting waiting to be implemented, and they're waiting for a couple of relatively small but critical parts to be attached to them so that they can actually be used. So these things are affecting the way we are. We went through a process and ended up at a proposed 3.4% tax increase. That's what we delivered to you. Your mandate to us was try to stay under 3.6. We actually, if you unpack the 3.4, it's a 2.4 all-in inflationary and increases. So we are in a 2.4 position. We've added the 1% for asset management. That leads to the 3.4. And subsequent to the information that we originally put forward to you, we received more accurate information about the impacts of the RCMP agreement that was negotiated between Public Service Canada and the union for the RCMP members, which is retroactive back to 2017, and that'll be a different matter. We're not dealing with the retro pay. We're only dealing with the impacts of bringing that salary band up to what is considered to be market standards across the board for police service in this country. So it's not that that was the intent of that whole negotiation process, but that led to a 0.9 add to your budget that you've received in the materials that you received yesterday. So I know that's probably a bit of a shock to you. So we still would like to go through the exercise of presenting this information, unpacking it. That's why the staff are here. it's an opportunity to understand why those pressures are there a little bit more. And some of the decision points that you have today are not related to tax increase. They are reserves or other matters, and we're hoping from a staff perspective that you can make some of those decisions and narrow down the scope of the decisions that you need to talk about. We're anticipating next Friday would be more the decision day for tax implications. And you do have the e-town hall on Monday night, so you do want to take that into account, whatever information and comments that you receive at that time. So I think that's it. I just wanted to set that stage and then turn it over to the mechanics of walking through the material again and taking the time to go through all those decision areas. And hopefully you'll find it a productive and undertaking today. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Rudolph. Ms. Mercer, presentations, 2022-2026 draft financial plan recap, please.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Welcome.
So today's presentation will start with a recap of what's in the updated draft financial plan, and then we'll go through the decision slides one by one. We have some updates, as Mr. Rudolph has just mentioned. Thank you. Since we last presented to you on October 29th. So I will go through those changes in detail over the next few slides. So our revised property tax increase is now 1% for general asset management reserve, which there's no change there, and 3.3% for a general tax increase. Now, this has increased by approximately 0.9% and is mainly due, as Mr. Rudolph said, to the RCMP contract increase. So the RCMP contract has increased by an additional 0.89%, and so the RCMP members below the rank of an inspector have been without a contract since 2017. And this summer they ratified their collective agreement. Unfortunately, due to the federal election, there's been a delay in getting the final settlement information, but we have been provided with some updated information on what that settlement is going to look like for the city. Now, there are two impacts to the settlement. One is for the impact on the 2021 financial statements. And so all of the retro pay from 2017 to the end of 2021 will hit the 2021 financial statements. And right now, based on that settlement information, we're looking like we're going to be about $3 million short. However, we'll talk about surplus at next week's Finance and Audit Committee meeting, but it looks like we'll have enough surplus to cover that shortfall. So there'll be no future implications to that retro pay settlement. So we'll talk about that in greater detail next week, but that will have no impact on the budget.
And Ms. Mercer, if I can just ask, the revised projected property tax increases were at 3.3 this year and now at 4.3, 2.5, 2.2, 1.8, 1.1. Part of that reflects also that we'll be paying off some fairly significant debt over the next few years, and that will reduce our interest payments. Is that part of the...
Yes, we have worked in some of the debt will be retiring, and that has been taken into account in those numbers, yes.
So if the city engages in a significant capital expenditure program, of course,
those numbers will go up based on the amount of debt borrowing that we will have. Yeah.
I'm asking that this morning for a purpose. It's not for my edification necessarily, but also to acquaint the public with the fact that we do have a very low debt in comparison to many other cities of similar size in the province, and that does give us an opportunity for significant capital expenditure if the good people of Nanaimo should so approve, and we're certainly facing a number of them. Whether it be the very necessary things or what I will call things that may have great public appeal, whether it's walkways at Departure Bay or whatever. So, appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. So the other impact is on the 2022 budget. So included in the RCMP contract budget that we received from E-Division is a 2.5% increase for wages and benefits. And this is the amount that they have been using as an expected settlement amount each year. So when staff initially heard that they had settled their contract and what the expected percentage increase was, we did a cost projection based on the anticipated increase and the number of members we had. And this has resulted in an increase to the 2022 budget of $1.2 million. So we bumped up our budget at that time by $1.2 million. We also ran that by E-Division to make sure we were in the ballpark. So based on all of this, we were fairly confident that our budget was enough.
Armstrong has a question.
Oh, yep.
Thank you. I see that we've looked at the wages for the non-commissioned officers, but now there's going to be significant raises for the officers. Have we been given those numbers yet, so we know how that's going to impact us?
Through your worship, to Councillor Armstrong. So are you talking about the members that weren't part of the union settlement?
Yeah, it's the inspector level and above. Yeah. We've got 2 inspectors and a superintendent. Right. So that's going to be a significant increase as well.
That's right. We have not heard what that is at this point. So expectedly at some point, we're going to have an increase for that as well. But we
okay, thank you.
There's been no conversation about that at all.
Thanks.
Yeah. So we have since been advised that the increase will also need to be calculated on the following items, as they weren't previously included in any of the accrual or budget calculations. So things like overtime, pension, division administration, and some other miscellaneous pay-related costs. The increase also needed to be on those. And there was all the information we had been given was based on members, and it was never including any of this. So we never, we couldn't have added this in because there isn't enough detail in the billing to add that, nor were we given that information from E-Division. So this increase has resulted in additional $1,157,000 needing to be added to the 2022 budget, and that equates to the 0.98% tax increase. So it will be another 3 to 4 weeks before we receive the final information on the settlement. So this budget amount is still an estimate, so it could come in lower or it could come in higher, and we will make any adjustments for the final budget if we don't receive that before provisional. The next item that increased was wages and benefits. So we've now received all of our benefit rates for 2022, and this resulted in an approximate 0.08% increase. So these benefit rates include WCB, employee benefits, CPP, EI, and pension. And so the pension rates decreased substantially, while all the other benefit rates increased, with WorkSafe and CPP being the largest increases. So the net effect is a 0.08% increase. The next item that we changed was casino revenues. So the assumption in the draft budget is that casino revenues will take 2 years to return to pre-pandemic levels. And what we're finding is that that is really not the case, that they're going to come back sooner than 2023. So what we have, and our first payment was substantially higher than we normally have for casino payments. So we've gone back and revised the budget to pre-pandemic levels. So that's provided another $153,000 in revenue to the budget, which is approximately a 0.13% decrease in the tax rate. And the last item is there was some miscellaneous changes that resulted in a decrease of $23,000, and that equates to an approximate 0.02% decrease. So one of the items in there was the debt repayment on the conference center decreased as we renewed our loan, and the rate is lower than what we previously had. So those items all add up to a 0.91% increase, and that's how we arrived at the 4.3% increase. So the next, so reserve funding. So the draft budget, in the draft budget, $3.4 million has been used from the Special Initiatives Reserve to reduce property taxes over the next 4 years. So these funds came from the 2020 surplus as a result of the COVID-19 restart grant that was received. And we spread these over 4 years to reduce the tax increase and minimize the impact of using surplus to fund operations. So if we hadn't have spread it over the 4 years, we would have seen a large spike in 2023. And so this, in effect, smooths out the tax increase over those 4 years. So there were no changes to the percentage increases for water and sewer user fees since we last presented on October 29th. However, there has been a change to the sanitation user fee. So at the time of drafting the budget, the annual sanitation user fee was projected to be $193 for 2022, and that's up $4 from $198 per year in 2021. So since the October 29th budget overview, staff have calculated the costs relating to two items that have an impact on sanitation user fees. One is the designated reception facility, and in October we were advised that at the end of this month our reception center is changing locations from Nanaimo to Chemainus, and so as a result the city now has to transport all of its recycling to Chemainus, and this wasn't anticipated at the time of drafting the budget. And we had to add some money to the budget to fund the transportation of these items. So this has resulted in an increase of an additional $8 per year for a total annual fee of $201 in 2022. The other item that will affect sanitation user fees, but we'll talk about it as a decision slide, is the refuse truck life cycle and funding analysis review that was done. And we do have a report in the agenda for this, and it will be a decision slide. The recommendations will be a decision slide later. So right now, the rate that you see before you of $201 just incorporates the change for the reception facility change. So the impact, this percentage increase has an impact on a typical home with a value of $544,227, and it would result in a homeowner paying $2,392, and that's an increase of $98 over 2021. So that's a $20 increase from our last presentation, and that accounts for the four items that I had mentioned earlier: RCMP, the benefits, casino, and the other small amounts that were changed. Water fees would be $32 for the year, so no change there, and there would be no change to the sewer fee increase of $6 per year either. And as I mentioned, the sanitation fee will increase by $12, and that's related to the Recycle BC designated reception facility changes. So the overall increase to a typical family home is $148, and that's a $28 increase from our last presentation. So $20 as a tax increase and $8 as an increase for sanitation fees. And again, this is all before any homeowner grant is applied for. So the next three slides show a breakdown of the key budget drivers. So I went through all of these in great detail on the 29th, so I will only go over the four items that have changed. So on this slide, the RCMP contract went up $1,157,000 to we needing $3,499,000 now in the budget. Wages and benefits line also increased to $2,830 or $30,000 for a $93,000 increase or a 0.08% increase. On this slide, we revised the casino revenue. So prior to this, it was $672,000 that we were expecting in casino revenue, and now we have $825 for an increase of $153,000. And on this slide, the other changes line decreased from $77,000.
Department has a question, and then
Yep.
Councillor Bonner.
Yep.
Thank you. Just on the previous slide,
Yep.
what does it mean when it's a transfer to facility development reserves for the 531? It's on the previous.
Oh, okay. So with certain Parks and Rec and Culture revenues have a component in them that gets allocated to the facility development reserve. And what this is the money goes into that reserve to fund replacement of these facilities as they age out. So there's a component so as revenues go up, so does the amount that we transfer to this reserve. So it's an asset management reserve for Parks, Rec, and Culture facilities.
What's our, if I may, Your Worship, what's the asset management for, if not facilities?
Well, in this particular case, it is for Parks, Rec, and Culture facilities, but asset management, the asset management reserve itself is for all different kinds of assets. So it could be water pipes, sewer pipes, buildings.
Okay.
There's a myriad of things.
Specific.
This is very specific to these facilities.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. This is just a math question. In your screen where you talk about the RCMP contract is 1.157 million is the 0.98% increase, which would make a 1% increase 1.180 million. But in your asset management slide, you show a 1% increase as being 1.233 million. I was wondering how the figures are different there.
Sorry, so I can see the 1,233,000 here. Where was the other number you were saying?
Well, it's the RCMP contract information where you say 1.157 million is a 0.98% increase. So I did the math.
Yep.
That makes it 1.80 as a 1% increase, but now you're saying it's.
I will let Ms. Fuller answer that because she has all the details on that.
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. So for 2022, 1% of taxes is actually about 1.186 million. So why the 1% for the asset management doesn't exactly match that is we can't project. When we do the taxes, we don't know what the 1% of taxes will be because it will change because growth also impacts what 1% of taxes will be. So we make an estimate, and then what will happen is we do a bit of a catch up the following year so that we stay at the 1%. So you're always going to find that asset management, mathematically, it'll work out to 1%, but it's not going to be, the number's not going to be exactly what 1% of taxes is, because otherwise you get this iterative process that you can never make it match.
I'm going to take your word for it.
Yeah, I have a big spreadsheet that we can go over and I can show you all the adjustments. So it is, we go back and we make the adjustments so it's exactly 1% of taxes for the prior year. So you always have this little tiny bit of catch up that's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Mercer?
Thank you. So the other item I'm just going to briefly touch on is the amount for growth. So currently we have $1.3 million in growth revenue in the budget. We have received our preliminary numbers from BC Assessment, and it is looking like we will just receive slightly above $1.3 million for our growth for this year. So final growth numbers won't be received until March, and we will incorporate any changes for the change in growth at that time. However, it doesn't look like we're going to receive much more, if any, in additional revenue above the 1.3 that we're going to get for growth. But I won't know that until March now, but it's looking like it's just marginally over $1.3 million. So now we'll go through all of the business cases and the other decision items for Council's consideration. I will do a run through of all the slides first, and then we'll go back to the top and we'll start going one by one individually. So the first few slides are relating to business cases that were produced but not included in the draft plan. And all of these business cases can be found in your binders, as well as on the city's website under the budget information page. And staff are here as well to answer any questions you may have on these business cases. A couple of things I'd like to note are the costing on some of these business cases may change slightly due to the benefit rate increases. They will probably be minimal, but they could have just a slight tweaking of some of the percentage increases. So any business case that council approves will have an impact on the 2023 tax rates, as all of the business cases aren't budgeted for a full year in 2022. So whatever in 2023, they'll be budgeted for a full year. So there will be a small portion of the increase that will be picked up in 2023. So the first business case relates to the manager of financial services and special projects. So this is to provide additional resources for the finance department, so to effectively and efficiently meet current and future expectations and demands. So by adding this position with an April 1st implementation date, we have approximately 8.11% increase, as general revenue would be the funding source as it's an ongoing operating cost. And status quo would be to not add it and leave the budget as it is, so no changes would need to be made. So I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody might have on this. Make my job easy. Okay. Oh, sorry, I was supposed to go through all of these. Okay. It's early.
Criticize your performance.
Yeah. Well, I had to get an extra dig in for mine. So the next item, business case, is a supervisor for technical support. So to provide the IT, technical, and client services section with additional capacity and oversight to support the city's increasing technology requirements. So this would be adding the position effective April 1st with a 0.09% expected increase in 2022. Status quo would be to not add it and keep the budget as it is. So the next one is for police services. They support staff resourcing plan. So the next few slides give you the options for this plan. And option 1 is they've identified as their ideal scenario, and that's to add 15 positions over the next 5 years. So the 2022 positions would start with an April 1st implementation date, and the expected increase for 2022 is 0.44%, and then 0.37 for 2023, and on all the other years, our impacts are listed there as well. Option 2, yep.
Councillor Armstrong has a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just looking at the resourcing numbers of the RCMP versus municipal police forces, and they're significantly lower. So I guess my assumption is going to be, and I could be out to left base, but I don't think I am, is that in the next negotiations, which will be starting soon again, that the NPF will start looking at trying to push the resourcing numbers up. So have you had any indication from E-Division that that's going to be the case? Because if that is the case, I believe we're something like 40 or 50 members short compared to our other municipalities of similar sizes. So would we be in our best interest to do this now, or should we wait to see what happens with the contract?
Through your worship to Councillor Armstrong, we have not had any information on their upcoming negotiations or any indication of where they would be. So I can't comment on any of that because we haven't received any of that information.
Thank you.
Scenario or option number 2 is is identified as their moderate scenario, and that's 11 positions added over the next 4 years. Again, 2022 positions would have an April 1st implementation date, and general revenue would be the funding source with a 0.3% increase in 2022, and the following increases are listed for the following years. Option 3 is identified as their minimal scenario, and this is adding 8 positions over 4 years. And like the other two, the 2022 additions would start April 1st, and general revenue would be the funding source with approximate 0.26% increase in 2022. Option 4 is the status quo, and we wouldn't add any of these additional positions to the budget. The next one is a business case for a parkade security plan. So this business case suggests that we should retain the services of a security consultant who specializes in parking facilities to conduct a risk assessment, which will identify strengths and weaknesses in our existing, the existing security measures in our owned parkades. So this does not have a tax impact. We can fund it from the parking reserve fund, and it's $25,000 would come out of that reserve. So there would be no tax impact to this one. And option 2 would to not do the security plan. The next business case relates to the community clean team. And there is, the next couple of slides talk to the options available for this one. So the Community Clean Team pilot project began in,
Councillor Bonner has a question.
Thank you, Worship. This maybe, and I know this doesn't give a tax increase. I'm talking about the Parkade security plan here. Is that not something that the RCMP do? They do the SEPTEP security checks where they tell you what sort of things you need to change in a particular area to make it less likely that to be, criminal activity there?
I'll let Mr. Rudolph answer that question.
So, Your Worship, the intent was just to go through the slides and then come back to each one and allow those questions and conversation to happen at that time, and perhaps the police can, so everybody can participate. So this is just a refresher. Maybe we can go a little faster to get to the back to the slides, and yeah.
I can go over these in less detail, and then we can go over them. Okay, so option one for the clean team would be to create a permanent community clean team. So that would be an ongoing budget line item. So we would have a general increase of 0.4% in 2022. Option two would be extend the clean team for an additional year to the end of 2022. And you have two funding options here, one from general revenue, which is a 0.21% increase, or from the Strategic Initiatives Reserve, or Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, and there would be no impact to funding it for that year. And option three is to end the project as it is scheduled at the end of this year. The next one is for the manager for Viera, and this position would be added February 1st. And this is a little bit different because we expect a 0.09% property tax decrease associated with this position, as we feel that by adding the position, more revenue could be generated through the training programs, and so that we would receive more revenue than we would the cost of the manager position. So that results in a 0.9% expected decrease. Option two is to maintain the status quo, but if we did that, the Viera course offerings would be scaled back, and we would have an approximate 0.0% increase to property taxes, as we wouldn't be receiving as much money from training courses. The RCMP additional bike patrol units, this is expected, or the business case suggests an April 1st start date, and it would be, as it's ongoing operational, would be funded from general revenue at a 0.43% increase for 2022. Option number two is to not do it and just remain status quo. The next couple of slides deal with the aquatic development plan. And option one is a full implementation of this plan in 2022. And as it's ongoing operations, general revenue would fund it, and approximately 0.2% to 6% increase is expected in 2022. Phase two is option two is a phased implementation plan, and general revenue is the funding source, and approximately 0.12% increase for 2022. Option three is a modified approach, and so this is that council directs staff to come up with alternative solutions. So it's possible they could come up with a cost-neutral solution, but there is also the possibility that a reduction in service level would need to happen within the recreation and culture departments to support aquatics. Our next business case is for a lead supervisor for parks, trails, and natural assets. So this position would be added February 15th, and with general revenue at the funding source and a 0.17% increase expected in 2022. So this does have some one-time capital costs included in that increase. So you will see a slight decrease in 2023, as we wouldn't need those one-time capital costs in that budget year. Option number two is the status quo, so we wouldn't add this position to the budget. And our last business case relates to the parks maintenance worker for playgrounds. So this would be a position add for February 15th. Funding sources revenue services at a 0.16% increase approximately. And again, like the last one, there would be some one-time capital costs, such as a vehicle, that are included in 2022 that we would remove for 2023. So you see a slight decrease in 2023. Option two is to not include it. So the next few slides will go over just general decision points for council. Many of them are options to reduce the tax rate, but there are a couple that would increase. So the Climate Action Reserve, currently we have $165,000 funding this new reserve in our plan. So option one would be keep it at that level. Option two is to reduce the annual contribution, say to about $100,000. And if we did that, the property tax impact would be approximately a 0.05% reduction. We have snow and ice control. So we have included in our current draft plan a $95,000 increase for our snow and ice control budgets for 2022. So option number one is to maintain the $975,000 budget. And option two is to reduce it to 2021 levels of $880,000. So that's a decrease of $93,000 for an approximate 0.08% reduction in taxes. Pavement preservation. So we've added $50,000 to the budget for 2022. And option one is to maintain that budget. Option two is to eliminate it. If you eliminate it, the impact on the property taxation would be approximately 0.04% reduction. Our next item is landscaping at the Boxwood Detention Pond. So this is $67,000 was added to the budget for the landscaping at the Boxwood Detention Pond that was completed in 2021. So option number one is to maintain that budget. Option number two is to remove the landscape maintenance from the budget, and that would result in approximate 0.06% reduction. Public art maintenance. So we have added a new $25,000 annual budget to ensure the longevity of the city's public art collection. So option number one is to maintain the $25,000. Option two is to remove the public art maintenance budget, and that results in an approximate 0.02% reduction. The next item is the urban design roster. So we've added $25,000 to this budget item in the 2022 to 2026 financial plan. And option number one would be to maintain that increase. Option two would be to reduce the public art budget to 2021 budget levels. So there would be no impact to property taxes, as the general revenue funding for this project is a set amount. So a portion of all our project funding comes from taxation, and we have a set amount each year in the plan. So this $25,000 is included in the $7.4 million allocated to fund operating and capital projects. So what we would do is we would remove this $25,000, and that would be available to fund a project that was funded from reserves. And what that would do is it would maintain that reserve funding of $25,000, and we could use that to fund something else. So there isn't a tax impact, but there is a funding impact in the background. It's a little more confusing than the other ones, but it preserves some funding for other projects in the future. Our next item is an ask for $60,000 in annual funding for events to recognize the National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is June 21st of each year, and the Truth and Reconciliation Day that's held on September 30th. So currently we don't have anything in the budget for these days. So there's a couple of options available. And just to note, there is also an information report attached to the agenda that provides information on how this information or how these funds would be spent. So we have three possible options. One is to fund it, the $60,000 entirely from property taxation, and that would result in an increase of approximately 0.05% for 2022. Option two would reallocate $60,000 from the $150,000 we have in the budget for the downtown events grant budget. So there would be no tax impact to this because we would be taking money from an already existing budget item in our budget. Option three is status quo. So we wouldn't add anything for these 2 days, but the downside to that is we wouldn't have any money for these 2 days, and if we planned on doing any celebrations for the days, we wouldn't have money in the budget for it. This slide relates to the Buttertubs pedestrian bridge. So currently we have $500,000 in the budget to complete this project. However, current feasibility report estimates the cost to be around $1 to $1.5 million. And again, there is an information report that has information for background information on this project. So we have two options. One, we can remove the project from the budget, and that would free up funding for other projects. Or we have option two is to make no changes to the project plan. So additional funding will be required to move forward, and this may involve reprioritizing or canceling other projects. So staff would return to a future meeting with an update when costs are further refined. So if council chose to do that, we would have to come back and give you the options around how we would do that. The next 4 slides relate to the Albert and 4th Complete Street project. So based on current estimates, additional funding and direction is required. And again, the information report will provide you with all the background information that you would need regarding this. And there is no tax impact to any of the 4 options that are identified, as they're all funded from reserves. The first option is reduce the scope of the project and increase the budget. So we would need an additional $400,000, which we could fund from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, and we would need to reduce the scope of the project to Pine Street to Milton Street. Option 2 is to increase the budget and proceed with option A, so that's bike lanes uphill only, and that would be a budget increase of $800,000 and could be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, and proceed with option A for the Dunsmuir Street to Kennedy Street section. Option 3, again, increases the budget but proceeds with option B, so bike lanes in both directions. And again, this would have an increase of $800,000 and to the budget, and that would be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve, and it would proceed with option B for the Dunsmuir Street to Kennedy Street sections. And option 4 is to remove the project. So this would leave funds available for future projects to be funded with. So we have approximately $900,000 that would stay in water reserves and $1.4 million that would stay in general reserves for other funding. Sanitation is our next item, and so with this slide, I'll go through this a little bit more detail because we didn't have numbers for you at the last meeting. So the next 2 slides speak to the recommendations that have resulted from the refuse truck life cycle and funding analysis. And again, there is a report in the agenda that speaks to all of the work that was done to come up with these recommendations. So the current annual sanitation user fee, as I mentioned, for 2022 is $201. And for 2023, it's expected to be $205. So these rates were increased for the changes to the Recycle BC designated reception facility. So the 3 recommendations that have come out of this review are, 1 is to replace the department-owned diesel units 317 and 318 with new fleet-owned CNG units. So currently we have 2 used end-of-life vehicles for our spares, and we would replace those with new ones. We would, as there is a really long lag time from the time you order to the time you receive a new vehicle, the second recommendation is to lease a CNG refuse truck to replace the replacement unit for 317 and until that new unit arrives. So it's a bit of a stopgap measure till the new vehicle arrives. And the third option is to shorten the life cycle on all fleet-owned units to 8 years. So currently we have a 10-year useful life for all of our sanitation vehicles. So this has a cost impact. So if council chose to approve the 3 recommendations, an additional $22 increase will be needed over the next 2 years. Oops. So the new annual user fee would be $215 for 2022, and that's a $14 increase from our revised $201 user fee. So this includes the leasing of the CNG truck till our new unit arrives, and changing the useful life from 8 years to 8 years from 10. In 2023, the expected user fee for the year would be $227. And this increase includes the 2 new trucks coming online and the renewal and the removal of the lease vehicle, because we would no longer lead it because the new vehicle is on premise. So this adds an additional $8 to 2023 for a 2-year total increase of $22 for the to fully implement the recommended changes. So that's a bit of background on that one. And option 2, obviously, is to do nothing, keep the things the way they are, and make no changes to the budget. A new slide that we added to this week, we didn't have this for you last week, is an option to, with regards to the RCMP contract. So council does have the option to reduce the percentage budgeted for the RCMP contract. So our current draft plan budgets the RCMP contract at 95% for all years due to a history of vacancies and to minimize any annual operating surplus. So council could choose to lower this percentage to 94 for 2022 only, and then bring it back up to 2025 for years 2023 and forward. So a cost analysis has been done for the last 4 years, and a 94% budget rate should be sufficient, assuming that, spending levels remain same for staffing as well as other costs. So if they maintain the level of spending that they have had historically, we should be fine. However, if staffing and other costs increase dramatically, the 94% could be insufficient to cover all of the costs. Now, we do have a RCMP contract reserve that covers any contract shortfall that surplus is unable to fund. So our first funding source would be surplus to cover any overages, and if we didn't have that, we could go into the RCMP contract reserve and fund any shortfalls there. This reserve does have a minimum balance, and so if we dipped into that reserve and it went below its minimum balance, we would have to incorporate a repayment plan in the financial plan to get us back to those minimum levels. So there is some backup measures for if we do find that 94% was too low. So this 1% change would result in about a $315,000 decrease, or a tax reduction of approximately 0.27%. So before making this decision, council should consider that the reduction in 2022 would have an impact in 2023, as we would need to bring back the funding levels to 95%. So the impact on 2023 is an approximate 0.26% increase for 2023. So we're currently looking at an estimated increase for 2023 of 3.5%. So any one-time reduction in 2022 will have an increased impact on that rate. Also, the decision point could be delayed until final, at which time we would have a better idea of what our staffing levels would be for the year. And our last slide relates to the Special Initiatives Reserve. So we have included $3.4 million in funding from the Special Initiatives Reserve to reduce taxes in years 2022 to 2025. So council could change that amount if you so wished. Currently, the projected balance in the Special Initiatives Reserve at the end of 2025 would be $1,000, but this balance could increase slightly if we had projects that were funded from this reserve that came in under budget. So at this point, our projection is the money will be almost completely spent using all of the funds to reduce taxes over these years. So I'll go back to the beginning and we can start deliberating on each one.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mercer.
So it'll take me a minute to get back here.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
I just had a question regarding the reports. Are we getting presentations on the reports that are within this as well?
Your worship, through to Councillor Gesselbrock, yes. I think the intent for each of these this discussion topics, staff should be here to answer any questions that you might have and give an overview if you ask for that. With respect to the 3 or 4 reports that are attached, the answer is yes, you will get the staff to be at the podium and not necessarily read the reports, but provide you with information, and you can ask those questions at that time. So we'll transfer the responsibility to explaining from the finance folks to the departments that, well, in this case it is the same, that have responsibility for that service area. So yes, there'll be lots of time, hopefully, to go over that.
Gotcha. My question is, I guess, the pertinent points that those reports have in them. Some are discussion points of these particular decisions, and so at the point that that item comes up, that's kind of when we'll deal with that.
Okay, so the three reports, the reports at the back, you're asking about the ones for Butter Tubs and the Albert Street and those types of things. So when we get to those slides, we can have a presentation, or you can simply ask questions of staff. It's up to you.
Perfect. Yeah, just curious how it was going to be played.
Yep.
Thanks.
And Your Worship, just through you to Councillor Gesselbrock, at that point, we'll also flip to the mapping that is attached to those reports, so that all of council can see the specific areas you're speaking about.
Again, Your Worship, just on process, I don't know, this has been a moving process because of some of the late information, and we're hoping that you can take, for some of these that have there may be different ways to approach this. Those that have taxation implications that would increase taxes, you may want to defer those decisions until you next week or at another date. The other pieces where we're either decreasing taxes or dealing with a reserve item or need instructions from you, then those are the areas where you probably can make some decisions, so we can shorten the list of slides, and so that would be my suggestion. But because we're here today to answer any questions, this would be a good time to inform you of each of these positions, and they'd certainly vary in terms of the nature of why they're being recommended. And it's a little awkward because I know operational issues are staffing pieces, but they do speak to some challenges in the departments that we're trying to address.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Worship. I'm kind of like that idea of going through there, because I know later down the road, we're going to be finding money in various little places, and we're going to we'll have at that time, we'll have a better understanding of what's coming in, the assessments and everything else.
Yep.
So I'm quite in favor of that idea. I do have a question, though, for Mr. Rudolph, if I may. In your opening statement, you said this updated budget is a reflection of the increase in demand for services at the city, and I completely understand that. I'm trying to figure out, from a business point of view, and I know the city's not a business, but if we have an increase of service demand, we should, in theory, have an increase in services paid, in where if we're adding more houses to our tax base, or we're adding more commercial place to our tax base, which increase the demand, then in theory, we should, from a business point of view, you would want to make sure that the increase in revenue matched the increase in demand, which means we wouldn't need any of these tax increases to compensate for it. So maybe, I don't know, it's maybe a hard question to ask, but it seems to be that would be the way to do it.
Well, that's a great question, Councillor Bonner. There's a fair amount of studies and literature out there that talks about how growth doesn't pay for itself, especially low density growth. And the more you have a sprawling footprint in the municipality, the less efficient it is to manage. So we add, 2.6 kilometers of streets and pipes and all those. Those are assets that get turned over from the development community to the city to manage, and they become, if it's really low density, that's with high-end urban services, curb and gutter and all that type of thing, sanitation and all the things that go with it. We haven't done our own detailed analysis here in the city to determine the fiscal relationship, but it's clear that we can't seem to keep up even though we're growing. So while people are paying a lot in taxes, they don't necessarily cover the actual cost to maintain those services. The other part of this, and at some point in time, I think council will be getting into the user pay conversation with respect to general taxation, which covers everything, and then maybe there needs to be, we are turning the corner as an administration to try to explore areas where revenue generation is an opportunity for us, be it in sponsorship or user fees. And I believe the Viera, through the fire department is a prime example where we're very strong and we have an opportunity to actually make money. So I think we always talk about costs, but we don't really do a great job in municipal government at talking about revenues. And I think that's the difference with business, because it really has to equate to a balance. And here we are relying so much on taxation, and there's a lot of work that's being done by UBCM and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and municipalities to demonstrate that our fiscal model is not working particularly well, and it's challenging for municipalities who have to rely on property taxation to inherit all these additional pressures for service delivery when our fiscal model is challenging us and we're forced into this thing. So the growth, and actually population growth, is another area, and then change. I'll just mention it, cybersecurity, very big issue right now. This is part of the issue that's attached to the IT position here, is we need to be resilient, and things come along that we have very little control over, but we can take proactive measures to be ahead of the curve. So there's a lot of things attached to but if you wanted to have a session at some point in time to understand the growth, the implications, and this, I totally believe this falls into the conversation with the new Reimagine exercise for the city in terms of, but I think a business would understand if you have a very sprawled footprint of your assets and your responsibilities, you would have bigger costs than if you were a more contained city. So there's a lot to that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Couple of things. First of all, I agree with Mr. Rudolph's suggestion about process for this year. Secondly, I'm really interested in pursuing the user pay conversation, and especially considering the always increasing challenges that the municipality has faced with funding everything through general taxation. But another point occurred to me, and it may be out of line, so please bear with me, but just in terms of process for future years, I was just so impressed, as I always am, listening to Ms. Mercer's very articulate summary of why we're looking at the tax increase that we are for now, what the pressures are for adding things possibly to that budget might be. And I know that this meeting is streamed and some people will watch it, but it occurs to me that for future, let's consider having a special council meeting on a Monday night where Ms. Mercer gives this report in open, and then have that immediately followed by our town hall and allow the public to respond to what they've seen and heard. I think this is great education, and I just wish more people could hear this conversation, because I fear that not as many hear it during the day as a GPC as would during the evening. And I think it would really serve us well to have the public, more of the public, hear this and be able to ask intelligent questions, have them responded to, and then following that, council could take that feedback into account when we have to make our tough decisions. So just a thought for future, but I appreciate the summary, Ms. Mercer. It's very helpful, and we'll see where we go from here. Thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just a question on process here. So at this point in time, are we able to ask questions on specific items?
Yes.
Good. So I have some. Number one is the number 8, the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. With regard to option number 2, the $150,000 from the downtown events grant packet. Has that in the past been at that level, and has it all been allocated?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Turley. So the $150,000 has been a set budget for several years, and all of the funding does get allocated based on the applications that were received.
Okay.
Last year was a bit of COVID has added a unique element to that, and not all of them have been all the funding has been used, but in prior years, yes.
So I asked this question previously, but when I read this scenario, I'm a little confused about the answer I got at the last meeting, and that is the $60,000. I'm assuming that Sunamo and or school district are applying for this $60,000, or are we just allocating it as one of the options to fund the event.
So perhaps the department can answer this better than I can, but the idea is that we would put on, it would be a city produced event, and it wouldn't necessarily, we would have partners in it, but this would be our portion of the funding.
I think Mr. Lindsay's going to provide some help here.
Just a minor addition, I think council's well aware that we worked with the school board and Stanemo this year in putting on the first event, a successful event, and there was participation from all parties. The city's portion, we're still finalizing that number, but it'll be about 35,000, we think, at this point. And of course, that was not in your budget this year. So we, moving forward, this would be the city's allocated portion towards these two events. I think there is, and we hope the opportunity to work with those partners again on bringing these events forward. But this would be the city's contribution to those events.
Okay. Based on that information, I'd be very uncomfortable to be using reallocating 60,000 from the grant budget, because we've just recently developed a BIA, which are going to be looking hopefully for increasing events downtown, and I would not like to see events that have happened downtown be cut back because of the $60,000. And I know it's very unusual for me to suggest a tax increase, but I think this is one case where to regenerate the downtown, we'd be foolish to be pulling money away from a budget that actually helps bring people downtown. We should be paying for it through general taxation, where everybody contributes as opposed to property owners in the downtown. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Your Worship. And thank you, Councillor Turley. Those are great points. I think for the process, and Mr. Rudolph or Ms. Mercer can correct me if I'm wrong, but we'll start from the beginning now, and any questions you have on this position, and then the next slide, the next slide, the next slide, and go through it that way. I think that was the intent. You can, at that slide that you're speaking of, if that is a motion that you would like to make, at that time, you guys can have the discussion and possible make the motions at that time.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but are we expected, was this a day for decisions? I wasn't clear on.
Your Worship, you could. If you're comfortable.
As opposed to should.
Well, there's hopefully some shoulds in here. Not all of them are taxation. There's some taxation issues, there's some reserve issues, there's some decisions around capital. So I think it would be very helpful to get decisions on those, or at least know what the questions are. So I think there are some in here that you can make decisions on, and one of the options that, well, firstly, we anticipated that you would want to wait at least until after E-Town Hall on Monday night. And then we have planned yet another session with you next Friday to go back through that information and any further information you're looking for as a result of the conversations today. So you could be in a position to make decisions next week, or you'll have to decide what your process is at that time. We have, I think we mentioned to you earlier, we have endeavored hard to get information from other municipalities to understand where they are in their budget processes and some of the challenges. So we're hearing very similar language from the other municipalities in terms of these tax increases, but it would be nice to have that information for you, at least a little bit more than we are able to deliver. So we're not unique in our position of coming in with a higher tax increase than we planned or would like. So today, if we can make decisions on any of these items, it would be great. I'm assuming that if it's a tax increase, but you're not being asked to make a decision, but you may want to ask some questions, or you may want to give some direction looking for other alternatives. And if it is a non-taxation issue, we would be seeking some kind of decision from you.
Thank you very much. I need to remind myself, I shouldn't say just, but it's just a Finance and Audit Committee meeting. It's not council. Councillor Martman, do you want to?
I was going to ask a question following up on Councillor Turley's.
Why not do it?
But then that's not in order. But it's a simple question through you. Because of COVID, do we have any surplus in our community grants or our downtown grants that we were just speaking about?
through your worship to Councillor Martman, yes, there was. And then those funds were allocated out in a special grant distribution. I can't remember when we came, but the excess funds were allocated out to organizations. We had a special intake, and those funds, excess funds, were granted out.
Okay, thank you. But I do concur with Councillor Turley. I think downtown needs to be revitalized and kept alive.
Councillor Thorpe, did you want to say something now before we start to roll through?
Well, thanks, Your Worship. Just in terms of clarification, I sense we're sort of not stalled, but we're not sure of what decision points we're making today, and some I think we need to delay until after the town hall at least. But would we be well served to look at slides related to reserves? Is that what Mr. Rudolph is suggesting, or capital projects, and deal with those?
Your Worship, today was the day where we had intended to present in more detail the rationale behind each of these asks. If it's pretty straightforward, and I think a lot of them are, then we just move on. But so we don't have them necessarily ordered in a way that's just taxation and then others. So I would suggest we walk through them each. And as a general rule, if there's a tax increase, I would suggest you park that and for a decision at a future meeting, be it next Friday or somewhere else, and then we just go on to the next slide. But there's an awful lot of material here. We need to find a way to get through most of it, and it's not all taxation dollar questions. So I think if it shows up as a tax increase, then that's your signal that maybe we could have that conversation and then move it to a future decision day. Are you okay with that?
Personally, yes, I like that idea. We can walk through, and if there's questions, we can get more clarification and move through them in that fashion. Thank you.
Well, then let's go back to the beginning, but I must say as a general proposition, and no one wants to hear this from any mayor, I'd be hard-pressed to turn down any of these, given our responsibilities to the citizens of Nanaimo, but let's work through it, Ms. Mercer. Back to page 8, I think.
That's
1A, Manager, Financial Services and Special Projects.
Yep. So again, this position is for the finance department, and it's to provide us with additional resources to fulfill all of the things that have been adding up into the department. So yeah, there would be approximately a 0.11% increase for this position with an April 1st start. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Your Worship, some of these I may want to comment on, and this is one. The finance department is still rebuilding itself back to a staff complement level that existed before 4 years ago. This is one of those positions. So in addition to that, so it's what I'm observing is a department of managers that are working at times a lot of extra hours and doing a lot of management, but it's harder to do the leadership and sort of the strategic thinking. So this gives some capacity in the department to actually cover the workload that does exist. And we also are entering into a phase with the enterprise resource system, the business system, which is going to require some secondments. And so this is understandable, and it's just an observation, so I would be fully supportive of this ask. I guess that's my comment.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. My question was answered because I didn't bring my binder, and what I was looking for, what is the impact of not hiring? So thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Rudolph. Just regarding the strategy going forward with finance, I guess the GM of corporate services, are we no longer going that route? And this is sort of part of that restructuring and just more resourcing specifically with finance, and then special strategic projects, and that would be covered by this position.
Through the mayor to Councillor Gesselbrock, this is over and above that. That position is currently vacant, and we're looking at options to reorganize the portfolio, I bet. So that position this is in addition to the vacancy that exists with the general manager
So we're still considering then the general manager position, or is it something that is under review as well?
It's under review, but it's a separate issue.
Gotcha.
And it wouldn't have been dealing with these issues that apply to this position.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. It was sort of answered, but I do have a question for Ms. Mercer. Is this position, is there enough overtime being generated by people in your department that would actually, this position would pay for?
Through your worship to Councillor Armstrong, you know, finance doesn't, we collect the money, we don't necessarily earn the money. So our positions, this is more of a time and additional resource ask rather than something that will bring in more revenue.
No, that's not my question. My question is your staff working overtime to fill in the void?
So yes, yes, well, there's, most of the
That's good.
managers
Thank
are working overtime.
Yeah,
The
that
short
answers my
answer to that
question.
is yes.
Thank you.
Anything further in this item?
So, Your Worship, I suggest we just move on to the next slide.
So this is for the supervisor of technical support. I can't speak today. So this will provide extra or additional capacity and oversight to support the city's increasing technology requirements. And Mr. Mackay is here to speak to this business case if you have any questions.
I would ask that he come forward, please.
Mr. Mackay, welcome and good morning.
Good morning. I'll just make a quick comment on this position that the reason us IT people look so worried all the time is cybersecurity, information security. We have growing persistent threats against our municipality. Another municipality in BC was down for months and months because it did not take a proactive view on information security. Last week, we had the largest cyber attack in Canadian history, and the Newfoundland healthcare system shut down, months of recovery. So this position is to keep us proactive in that information security portfolio, align the team that is in that group, and also to support the development of city services. I'll take questions.
Thank you very much. I must tell you, I watched the very chagrined, embarrassed Premier of Newfoundland the other night trying to explain that, a number of individuals' personal health information was taken. My wife said, well, I don't care if people know how sick I am. And I said, well, dear, maybe some people might be concerned about all the personal knowledge that might be related to, for instance, an abortion or a health issue that could impact their employment and all of those things. So it is very serious. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment rather than a question. This is, in my way of thinking, sort of like purchasing insurance, because you hope you never need it, but if you do, it's there to help. And I would just point out, for those of us who maybe aren't convinced that this is a real threat, I received a message from my chartered accountant's firm, and they were attacked in January, and it was a significant attack, and a significant amount of time they had to clean everything up, and so, I hate to say that we need to spend it, but in today's world, I don't think we have any choice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mackay.
Thank you.
I think the point's made.
The next business case is related to the Police Services Support Staff Resourcing Plan. So the business case outlines 3 scenarios, adding various numbers of positions over the next 5 years. And
Your Worship, I would ask the superintendent to come forward. I would say that this report that you received earlier, this fall is the recommendations are the result of an independent review, but consultant in working with the detachment to identify what they understand to be their priority municipal employee support resource needs over the coming years. So this is something the superintendent could speak to far better than myself or others in the room.
Good morning, Superintendent. Welcome.
Thank you, Your Worship. As Mr. Rudolph spoke to this, we did have the presentation in September from Mr. Hurley where he looked at comparative analysis of RCMP detachments, RCMP to municipal detachments, and cross-Canada comparisons. We have not kept in pace with the municipal staff levels as our population has grown and as our caseload has grown. There hasn't been any resourcing formula or any process in which those areas have been addressed. What we are seeing at the detachment level is we have police officers doing administrative tasks because the municipal staff are insufficient, which is obviously not a very cost-effective strategy. The other point is when we're able to hire municipal staff that are trained and come with skills to do those administrative tasks, they do them better than police officers do. And they do them faster and far more efficiently. So there's that efficiency that comes with these positions. We recognize that we're providing you with the three options, and I think I'm a realist on this. In looking at the four positions that we're seeking, in the minimal scenario, the assistant manager position, we have two managers currently, and there hasn't been an allocation for any additional supervisory. Between the two of them, they're supervising 30+ people each, and both of them have retirement plans, so there's no succession planning either in place for that. There's no second tier, which causes some challenges. The second position is the police fleet supervisor. And I know we spoke earlier this year when we did the revision of the fleet, we determined that there had been some significant challenges in that area. The person who has the position of, they're called the fleet, they're more of a fleet or car jockey type role where they're taking cars back and forth to the garages and following up with the maintenance. They are not in the role of doing the analysis of our fleet, having the financial discussions, planning and projecting for our fleet. We go through police cars in approximately a lifespan of 2+ years to 3 years, depending on the car. Because of the 24/7 driving, the kilometers that are put onto it, and then the damage that comes as a result of it, the work. They don't last particularly long, so it's a constant challenge to keep on top of this. So better management is far more cost effective than less management on that. Shift supervisor, this position directly works with the operational units and the administrative files that are coming in. With a supervisor, they have the ability to make decisions without having to necessarily involve the police officers in that. It streamlines the process and creates less work on the officer staff. And the last is the major case file clerk. We've spoken of this previously with disclosure. It's the same word, it's just one of the other terms for it. This is one of the requirements that's coming out of the provincial MOU, where our files have to be developed in a certain format that is then acceptable and received by Crown Counsel. It started with the most serious of crimes, and then as the MOU progresses in time, it starts implicating more and more of our units. And so this is to manage that additional workflow as it's now migrating to traffic. All of our serious and vehicle death files, as well as into our projects and street crimes units. So the workload is growing. Any questions in relation to that?
Councillor Armstrong has her hand raised, Your Worship.
Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Fletcher. With your major file case manager, right now I believe you have one, which I think works with major crimes. Is that correct?
We currently have one person who has been with us for most of the year. We have another person that has started this month, and we have 2 clerk assistant roles.
So, but when it actually comes to the file manager, so you have 2. So would the plan be that obviously traffic would need their own because of the complexity of the things? And then would you look at having 1 per watch or shared per watches based on the new requirements of the MOU?
Your Worship, through you. At this point in time, we are using them as a pool, and they are being prioritized based on the files that are going through for disclosure. The disclosure process is very intense, and so they're prioritized, and then they work collectively in pushing these large files through, and then they start on the next one. So there's ongoing maintenance as well as the final prep.
And as a follow-up to that too, with the new changes, do you anticipate that you're going to need more people in your court resourcing unit?
Excuse me, could you please repeat the last part? I didn't hear the
with the changes with the MOUs, right now I think your court unit has like two individuals in there. Would you anticipate that because of the changes with the MOU and the Crown prosecuting change that you're going to need additional resources in that unit?
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I would anticipate that will be a building pressure. There's also been changes through the court process. You may have heard recent news stories involving the IHIT unit, and they call it the 5.2 or Section 490 of the Criminal Code. Because of the implications of the Jordan case law, where there's the requirement for timely prosecution. In order to manage that, there's often delays in when the date of the arrest occurs to ensure that we're meeting that requirement. And what's happening is we're having to do court applications in advance of the charge to hold evidence in a lawful manner. And it can be a complex and involved process that requires additional support and additional police officers, as well as the court liaison monitoring and process. If we do not have sufficient resources there, really our prosecutions fall apart because we lose the evidence. So it's a gatekeeper role. That pressure will be coming.
Sorry, my phone's ringing, but just as a follow-up, that you're saying that the file disclosure people would be looking after the 5.2s?
No, that wouldn't be at the disclosure level. They may have a role in marking and identifying some of the exhibits, but we're believing it will be at the court liaison level where they'll be having more engagement with Crown Counsel at that point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martman, then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, it's one thing for us if we approve the budget to hire more support staff. How do you feel about how it's going to be to fill those positions?
Your Worship, Councillor Martman, that has been a challenge without a doubt, and we've seen that with the disclosure. Everyone is seeking these individuals. It's not just Nanaimo that has the MOU. It is a provincial MOU. So being earlier is better than late to the trough, so they say. Yeah.
Okay.
It will be a challenge that way, but.
Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. You named a number of specific positions, fleet supervisor, case manager. Are those incorporated in the minimal scenario?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so above that would in the minimal scenario, you would capture all of the positions you absolutely need.
Those are the 4 positions, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to our Inspector. Supervisor, sorry. Who inspects the supervisor? Inspects. Okay, got it. My question here is you talk about efficiencies, and that occurred to me that this would make things more efficiently run if you had these positions that you're looking for. The opposite, well, the other part of that is if you're creating efficiencies and police officers are now doing police work instead of this work, do we need all the police officers that we've already budgeted allocated, or can we lose one of those and pay for all of these?
Our workload analysis is we're running at close to double of the municipal police agencies in terms of volume. They're averaging 40 files per police officer. We're running at over 100 files per police officer. Our next comparative is 70 is the provincial average. We are way above on our caseload. So there's no ability to cut any police officers to fill the municipal positions.
Okay. I had to ask a question anyway, because it's unfortunate about the police cars. I remember when I was building them in Windsor, those things look like tanks coming off the line, so I guess they're not building them as hard as they used to.
Yeah, they're a police package, but they get driven a lot, yeah.
Thanks.
I think it's always timely to remember that if we're increasing the population of the city by 1,500 to 2,000 individuals per year, that the need for policing services in particular, let alone water, sewer, garbage, etc., are rising accordingly, and unfortunately the tax base isn't increasing lockstep either as projects come on board.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Any further questions on this one? Thank you, Superintendent.
Your Worship, just noting the time, I'm not sure if you wanted to take this pause as a recess opportunity.
Probably not a bad idea. The next topic, I think, will be a little longer. All right, so we'll take the morning break, everyone. Thank you. Hi, Leonard Krogh here. I'm here with Karen Lindsay today. She's going to show me how to sign up for our app.
Voyant Alert, the City of Nanaimo's emergency notification system. So we'll start by going into the App Store, Mayor Krogh.
Done.
Next, you're going to hit search. And you're going to search for the app, which is Voyant Alert. So it's V-O-Y-E-N-T. Now you see, it's already selected it. Click there. Hit get, and then we're going to install.
And why are we downloading this app?
We're downloading that so that you can get this onto your phone system, and what it will do is it will send you a push notification out. So if the City of Nanaimo issues an emergency alert, it will actually push the notification out onto your phone. The really nice part of this app is that it's anonymous, so it goes by postal code. So we're not requesting you to put your name or personal information in. It just works off of the app through your phone system. There are also, if you have family members or friends that maybe don't have a smartphone or would like another way, you can also sign up online or call our Public Works Department, and they have phone and texting options available as well. So there's lots of options for people depending on what their needs are.
Fabulous. So you can rest with some comfort knowing you can find out what's necessary and know that people who are important to you are notified.
Absolutely. So now you have Voyant Alert on your phone. And now just select open. So the next thing you're going to do is you're going to tap in the postal code that it's prompting you.
All right.
So you just click on there and start entering. And then find on a map. So here you'll see the welcome page for the City of Nanaimo, and you want to subscribe to notifications, yes?
Yes.
Click that you agree to the terms, so click both to the yes for consent, and then hit next. And it's going to ask to either allow or not allow notifications, and you want to always allow.
Always allow.
Always allow. And the reason that is, if you don't allow, it won't push the notification out to you. So always allow.
Always allow.
And now you see here, you've got a message to accept that you've signed out. That's the two-factor authentication, and you're going to tap yes. And now you're in the system. Also, when you have a moment, we recommend that you pick your locations and sign up based on those locations, and then you'll get alerts from the City of Nanaimo.
Karen, thank you. Everyone, sign up.
Hey, Tiana. Hey. It sure is the coldest rink in town.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, buddy!
Nice save, James!
Wow, your goalie is keeping you guys in the game. Cheers.
Oh, man, that's hot.
Sorry, that's the way I like it. Oh.
Go, 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 go!
Penalty shot!
Scalds from hot drinks are a leading cause of hospitalization for children under 5.
2 minutes, stand in the front, unsportsmanlike conduct.
Hot tea and coffee will cause serious burns to a child in less than a second.
Got it, kid? Use the lid.
This is the 2018 redux of the lighting at Nanaimo's historic bastion. I've had the pleasure of being part of the relighting project on this amazing building in downtown Nanaimo. So what we did is we've replaced the original high-pressure sodium lights, which basically did an okay job of lighting up the bottom 10 feet of the building, and replaced them with modern LED lighting that has the capacity to change color. We can run through a number of different colors that we have pre-programmed here, in a pink, a purple, a green. Probably my favorite on here is Rainbow Chase for Pride Week. It'll actually run all the way around the building all the time.
With this new technology, organizations can now request that the bastion be lit to promote their cause by going to the City Nanaimo website and following the instructions. Go to Your Government, Bastion Lighting Requests, complete the lighting request form, and submit. You will hear from us within a couple days if your request has been approved, and the bastion will be lit in the colors that you have requested. If you have any questions, please contact the Mayor's office at 250-755-4400.
So the next time you're in downtown Nanaimo at night, come on and check out the new dynamic lighting at the Bastion.
We're here today to make a couple street names. There was some vandalism in town, and we're just going to make a replacement. In the roads today, we're doing our Dundas Street and Bruce Avenue. They're all 8-inch, and we use 3 different sizes, mostly 24-inch, 32-inch, and 36-inch. We do use a consistent font with street names. This is actually my metal blank, so the only material here is the material that I actually will cut out in vinyl. From here, we have to take out the vinyl that's not needed, which is the outer. So all we want to do is save the inside border. From here, we actually have to put a transfer tape on it. And what this does is it allows us to take the blue vinyl and pull it away from the clear backing that it's on, so we can apply it to our aluminum blank. Now that we have our 2 sheeted piece of vinyl, we take our aluminum blank, which has high intensity diamond grade, which you can see behind me. We have all different colors. We have orange, yellow, white, depending on the type of signs. Most of our white signs are regulatory, and the yellow ones are warning signs. And right here, all I'm doing is pushing the transfer tape a little tighter to the vinyl. And then from there, we peel it back, our plastic, which basically leaves us with a big sticker. We put it on the aluminum. And when we're done here, we take our transfer tape off, and as you can see, we're left with Dundas.
Thank you very much, everyone. If we can reconvene. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our next decision, business case is for the parkade security plan. So again, this was to hire a security consultant who specializes in parking facilities to conduct a risk assessment to identify our strengths and weaknesses in our existing security measures in our city-owned parkades. So this has a no tax impact, and it can be funded from the Parking Reserve Fund. So if you have any questions.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can ask my question again now that we're at here. Is this not something the RCMP could provide as part of the services they do?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Bonner. So I think there's certainly that ongoing crime prevention through environmental design work that's done on a number of our facilities and results in incremental improvements. This, I think, is looking at something we've talked about for a while of a much larger step in terms of physical, I don't want to say hardening, but physical improvements to the parkade. So do we need to move to gates, staffed entrances, more of an infrastructure investment in the facilities themselves? Do we look at incorporating designated secure bike parking, for example, in our facilities? So kind of taking our facilities to the next step, and the idea is that this money would help us identify an investment plan to provide security and safety in those parkades, but a little further than what we do now under the crime prevention.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Lindsay, before you sit down, maybe you can help refresh my memory. Security in the parkades, the city has a relationship or an agreement with local hotels, at least a couple of them, and with the new hotel that's coming on stream regarding providing parking spaces in this parkade at the conference center. Do we have an agreement relating to security that goes along with that? Is the city taking responsibility for that security, or does the hotel share in that?
The hotels, or those that lease or license spaces from us, pay the market rate, and part of that market rate goes back into this fund that we're talking about today. We do fund security in the downtown, and council has invested in additional security. What we were finding in the last couple of years, that although the security was intended to be more widespread throughout the downtown, we were spending almost 100% of the time of our security personnel within the parkades, just because of the demand. Because of the investment council's made on security, we've been able to expand that outside of the parkades. But the idea is, if a plan were able to come forward and implement some improvements here, the hope is that we'd actually be able to reallocate those resources in other places in the downtown, or decrease the need for them overall.
And if I may, Your Worship, as a follow-up, do we have any stats related to incidents related to security in the parkade, especially this one, car vandalism, thefts, and so on?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Thorpe, I'm sorry, I don't have those in front of me today. I can certainly follow up with council.
I just wondered if they're available at some point in future. That would be interesting.
We can follow up, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see anything further on this one.
Worship, this is one of those topics that you could make a decision on if you use the criteria of non-taxation.
Councillor Bonner. Seconded, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any contrary? None, motion carries. Thank you very much. Ms. Mercer.
All right, our next business case relates to the Community Clean Team. So again, this is a pilot project that began in 2019, and it is currently scheduled to end at the end of 2021. So the pilot project has increased the cleanliness of public spaces in downtown and the parks, and it has relieved the strain on the bylaw services section. So there are a couple of options to add this. One is to create a permanent community clean team, and there is, as it's ongoing, we would have a 0.4% increase approximately for 2020, and then again, that includes some one-time capital costs for 2022 that we would see a slight reduction in 2023 as we wouldn't need those one-time costs in that year. The next option is to extend the community clean team pilot to December of 2022. So you have a couple of funding options here. One is general revenue, so a 0.21% increase, or you could use the strategic infrastructure reserve to fund the project, as it is considered a one-year spend at this point. And option number 3 is to end the program at the end of 2021.
Councillor Bonner?
Thank you, Worship. How are we paying for this program right now?
It's reserves, right? Yeah. It's funded from reserves currently. So there is, I believe it was the Special Initiatives Reserve last year that funded this position, so there was no tax impact yet last year as well.
And if we took it out of reserves for going forward, it would be the same, no tax impact?
Yes, if we funded it from reserves, there would be no tax impact, yes.
And is everyone, is the public and everyone happy with the process? I noticed we're not getting a lot of emails now about issues.
I will let Mr. Sims answer that question.
Your Worship, I could introduce Mr. Dallaron to answer any public feedback that he may have had from the public on it, but it's certainly a support to our bylaw and our CMP officers as dealing with some of the disorder in the downtown. This is really it's a holistic approach that the team uses to keep things clean, but I'll let Mr. Dallaron speak to any of the public feedback.
Mr. Dallaron, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone, and to your worship. Yes, of course, significant improvement we have seen and support that provided to our bylaw officers as well. As an example, we had 1 week due to one of our staff being involved in an accident and another one got ill. We couldn't fully staff that operations for about 1 week. We had just one person on it. During that 1 week, we had so many calls, and calls internally from our bylaw officers, but also publicly. That's how important that role is right now in maintaining the services that we needed.
Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Worship. So I guess the final question here is, we're looking at 2 different costs. One is that we sort of bring it in-house, or we just leave it as it is. If we increase the cost to 0.4%, is that going to give us a better service, or is it going to give us the same service with just in-house staff?
Through your worship, yes. If we are going to have a permanent position in place, we are going to acquire the equipment needed, and those equipment would be spec'd properly to be used for these functions and also support other public space cleaning, which increases our collection capacity almost to 200% of the existing ones. Right now, we're renting equipment that are not right fit for these operations because these are not a long-term commitment, and we cannot get the right equipment for it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hemmons and then Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd actually like to move to take this to the end of 2023 with the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve. Right, so the motion presented on slide 10.
Option 2.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Councillor Turley, do you wish to speak to it?
I will say very briefly that a few weeks ago I had an interaction with the bike patrol, the RCMP bike patrol, and they just spoke so highly of how quickly that team responded to those immediate collection needs. And while I was with them, they were actually able to call and have someone pick up. So I actually saw it in action, and then having our partners say how important it was to them. I'm happy to see this, recognizing we have a difficult budget in front of us. I'm okay seeing it come from the reserves for another year, and then reevaluating it next year.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe, and then Councillor Brown, and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I wasn't expecting the motion quite yet. I do have a question, and I'm not sure who to direct it to. We had an email, Council had an email recently from a former contractor who did refuse collection downtown. putting forth the argument that that basically it was cheaper to simply contract out rather than have the city bring this in-house, buy equipment, and so on. And I respect the figures that person provided, but I would just like a comment on that, the advantages to in-house hiring, buying, as opposed to contracting out to people who already have the equipment and presumably the expertise.
I'm going to talk in general that services that we provide in comparison to private sector service. The ultimate goal of our services is to provide as much as possible quality work when it's needed, where it's needed. One of the challenges with contracting this type of services that because of the unknown nature of this type of requests coming to us, most of the time we know there are certain areas that reoccurring events happening, but also we have an unknown reoccurring events happens in variety of locations. Then that adds to the complexity of the contract that we are going to in place, which required from at least private sector point of view to have a higher payoff rate to be able to respond, as I mentioned, not knowing exactly when and where to provide these services. That is one side of the story, but the other side is that the program that we have developed right now, it has been a pilot for just a short period of time. And because of the nature of that, we couldn't get out and have a contractor to perform service for a short period. Usually in private sector, they expect higher payoff rate if this is not long-term and a stable contract. Then I cannot comment on the actual cost, but what I can comment on is that, as has been mentioned, and I have many examples of how quickly and how promptly we have responded to this request and dealing with the situations where what's needed.
Thank you, Worship. I'll just add that I'm in support of the concept of a clean team and extending that work. I'm just not sure what route would be best to follow, but I appreciate your comments.
Mr. Groot.
I may have just one comment here. As I mentioned, right now, because of the limit we have on time, we are renting equipment while our staff providing the same quality service. The tools that we are using are not proper tools. If we are making this a permanent position, by acquiring the right equipment and procuring the right tools, we can easily increase the capacity of our collection capacity of our operations by minimum 200%.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Groot wishes to comment. No? Sorry? Yes? Maybe? Mr. Sims? Somebody?
In case there's a question around that specific issue, we probably shouldn't be having a conversation around a specific email with an individual, but the issue, I think, was handled properly as it should be privatized or not. The current arrangement is assuming, well, if you committed for a long term on this, and our pattern has been that it's not going away, and if we stop the service, we would probably see a significant increase in calls for service because of the people would notice materials in parks and that type of thing. That's why Mr. Groot's here. Maybe he could speak specifically to that. So it seems to be every year we kind of move it 1 year out, hoping that the situation will improve, but it hasn't. So I think this is one way to find more time to see if it will resolve itself to some extent. And this is one, and maybe as part of if this motion is successful, we could come back with an explanation of another option, which might be on the contracting out, which there's a fair amount of contract service already in the parks. If you're there, you'll see the contractors collecting that garbage. So, but this is more attached to the bylaw service and cleaning up homeless camps and that type of thing. So it's a bit of a different piece. So.
I think Mr. Van Horn wishes to add something. Mr. Van Horn, please.
Yes, I could perhaps provide a little bit of clarity. The notion of privatizing something or contracting it out, we have, because this is a municipal service that is currently being done by city workers, we have language in our collective agreement that says that there's a fair wage clause that we have to, you don't save on the wages. If there's a flexibility issue or something that in the collective agreement we can't do it at certain hours because of a flexibility thing, we would look to try and negotiate different hours work with our union on that. But in terms of saving it by privatizing, paying a lot lower wages for it, that's not something that would be practicable for us. I think that was to Councillor Thorpe, the point you were looking at for in terms of privatizing a service.
Yeah, that's one aspect of it. I appreciate the wage aspect, but there's also things like purchase of equipment and
Yes.
so on.
Yes, of course. Just wanted to handle that one.
Thank you. No, I understand.
Councillor Brown, then Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I won't be supporting this motion as on the table. I much preferred the original, or the option one, I guess, not the original one, for two reasons. The first is that one that Mr. Rudolph highlighted. I think we keep hoping the issue will disappear, or the reason for the community clean team, but it's not going to in any time frame that I think in the next decade. So I think I have to be honest and realistic about that. And even prior to, or even stepping back from that issue aside, I think I've heard lots of comments over the years around the general cleanliness of our city and a desire to see a little higher standard. And this is unfortunate, the work that this team obviously has to do, and that it's a necessity, but I do think it's part of that general conversation around the cleanliness of our city. And then the second reason I won't support it is because when I look back over the sort of a decade worth of budgets, and I do some math that's definitely not up to an accounting standard, but I think it shows me enough that some of the past decisions, I don't criticize them, that council's made around sort of chasing percentages rather than service levels. If you sort of average it out, it works out to, between 2 and 3% of what we would have been able to implement in our term, and see the same sort of projects that have been achieved, or service levels that have been achieved with having to go higher. And I look back on last year's decisions around pulling from reserves, and some of them have been highlighted. And obviously it's a unique year around COVID. But when I see some of these decisions and the continued reliance on reserves, knowing that those ultimately bottom out at zero, I feel that we would be placing future councils in very poor positions to have serious conversations around service levels and projects and capital projects with essentially limited reserve capacity, and having to increase if they wanted to keep service levels, what undoubtedly will become the expectation, they're going to have to see serious increases in their tax, and ultimately that percentage. So I think it unfairly sets up some of these decisions. I think are minor when taken one off, but the sum total of them will unfairly set up the next council or the council beyond that to maintain community expectations around service levels, and also fulfill capital projects, because they will be behind and have very low reserve amounts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In order, Councillors Turley, Martman, then I'm going to go to Councillor Armstrong. Her hand was up, and then Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Brown may be a pessimist. I tend to be a little more of an optimist. And that is, I look at the increasing number of supportive housing that is currently going on, that one would hope would reduce some of the challenges we're facing, in which case I'm very apprehensive about making this a permanent situation coming directly from tax dollars. I prefer to see it on a year-by-year basis, and if it gets to the point where the extra housing is not doing what we expect it to, then we can look at resolving. But if it's working now, let's not tinker with it too much and proceed for another year that we've got it set up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. Councillor Turley, you took the words right out of my head. So I'm again optimistic as well. I'm hoping with the housing and a year from now we may see a different picture in our downtown and our city. So I support this motion. I think it's a balance of our revenue. It would be 0.21. And as for the strategic infrastructure reserve, I would imagine that 249 is for equipment that would stay with the city anyway. So I'm definitely supportive of this.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. I will be opposing the motion for the same reasons as Councillor Brown. I think it's time. As we said, I've been in the city since the 90s, left for a bit, then came back. This has always been an issue. We heard in 2010 that the supportive housing that was being built would deal with the problem. Yet now we've gone from 200 homeless up to 600. So I'm far more pessimistic than others. I don't believe the problem is going to be solved, and I think that the community clean team is sorely needed. We already have service groups, organizations like the Van Al Clean Team, and those are already doing this work for free or donations from the citizens. And if we had a full-time team, I would like to see the relationships build between the community organizations and those that are doing this, so that they're not having to always go to the public to help pay for this. It's something that I think the public really wants to see. And I think it's really important that, as Councillor Brown says, that we bite the bullet. This has been on the books for years, and we keep ignoring it, and we're going to continue to ignore it. So I won't be supporting. I'm in favor of motion 1. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say, I think Mr. Dellerman will let you sit down and let Councillor Gesselbrock make his point, or did you want to add something?
I just want to have a comment. I just had a visit of some of my former colleagues from City of Victoria. And of course, this was one of the topics that we discussed. Since pandemic, they have, despite of significant reduce in tourism and visitors in downtown Victoria, they have increased this staff level by 3 for the similar operations.
Thank you. Councillor Gesselbrock and then Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate the points raised by Councillor Brown and Councillor Armstrong, and I'm of two minds on this one. I think that the reasons for the necessity of this clean team aren't going to go away in the near term, and there is a need for ongoing resourcing of it. I think that we are going to be facing some taxation pressure, and it's tough to make an assessment without seeing sort of the totality of what tax increase we're going to be facing with all the other items added on. And so I could vote against this one or vote for it, and would need to make a final decision on it once I see it all added up. And so I think I'll probably vote against this motion as is, with the preference to have it added as a tax increase, and then be able to step back and look at everything that we've added, and then start subtracting from there if needed. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Your Worship. I could be convinced to increase our taxation for this program because I really believe in it. What I'm trying to do with this motion is, I think, get it off the table, get it funded for another year. So if this motion fails and someone would like to move at our next Friday meeting where we start adding things to the budget, I could very well be convinced of that. However, I do want to, I'm very aware that we are going to have these incremental additions right across the board, across departments this year. And so this, for me, is an easy one to say. We have the reserves. We know this is a needed program. Let's keep it going and reevaluate next year. That said, I do very much appreciate the perspectives of Councillor Brown, that if we kept taxation at a steady pace, and instead of chasing, percentages, then we'd see an easing over years. But given the budget we're looking at this year, this is, I think, the best way to address this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hemmons has sort of summed up my position. Councillor Brown's points and the others are well taken. However, as I said earlier, I looked at all of these positions and requests that are not in our budget. They're all worthy, they're all important, they're all valuable to the community. So for this year, on the basis and intention that if things have not improved, next year I may well vote for the permanency of these of this proposal, but for this year, given that we are looking at a more substantial tax increase than was ever anticipated, I'm going to support it, mindful of my granny's old line, which many of you have heard from your grandparents, I'm sure. Cleanliness is next to godliness. And Lord knows if we're trying to revive our downtown, we're talking about ensuring we have community support for various events, etc. It would be completely inconsistent not to support the continuation of this scheme. So, seeing no further speakers, all those in favor of the motion? Councillors Martman, Hemmens, Krogh, Thorpe, Bonner, and Turley, yes. And opposed, Councillors Gesselbrock, Armstrong, and Brown. Motion carries. Thank you very much. That was a useful debate. Thanks. Mr. Dellerman, thank you. Ms. Mercer.
Okay, so our next business case is for the manager for Viera. So this is adding a dedicated manager to the Vancouver Island Emergency Response Academy, or Viera, to allow for the Assistant Chief of Education and Training to focus on Nanaimo Fire Rescue, staff development requirements, and allow for Viera to increase course offerings. Like I've said before, this is an odd one because adding a position is expected to reduce our tax rate as we anticipate more revenue to be generated by adding this position. And the revenue is expected to outpace the cost of this position.
Sorry, Councillor Brown, did I miss you earlier?
Nope.
No? Okay. Everyone's jumping up before the chief has even opened his mouth. Perhaps we could let him speak first. Morning, Chief Doyle, and welcome.
Good morning, Your Worship. Good morning, Council. I can maybe add a little bit of context to the generating revenue. So beginning in 2018, we served 65 departments. Now we're at 122, 4 years later, 3 years later. Some of the newer opportunities as well are some of the larger departments as opposed to some of the smaller departments we were dealing with before, such as Vancouver, Kelowna, Abbotsford, Richmond, West Vancouver, North Vancouver City, and Langley Township. Those are just some of the more recent opportunities. As when this business case was developed, I think it was the numbers used were as of September 28th in terms of revenue, which were $147. As of today, our revenue is at $604,000. So even as of September 28th, we're exceeding our projection of $450,000. So at 604, we're far exceeding that. I guess with that, we've also seen from 2018 to today a year-over-year increase in revenue. With that comes an offset in our budget, and it also helps fund our own internal training that we're required to conduct just through our standards, WCB, NFPA. And then the last part, I think, is to kind of put context to this is we're a medium to large size department with a training division of 1.5 people now, because we added the training technician when we got out of the dispatch business. That's far less than other training divisions in other like-sized departments, i.e. Victoria, Saanich, Kelowna, Kamloops, Prince George, and they're running this business off the side of their desk. So this business is being run by the Assistant Chief of Training, and then being supported by our admin staff. And so it's really just being run off the side of the desk, and it's performing quite well. But the reality is with this growth, it just can't stay being supported off the side of the desk. It will suffer, and our own internal training will suffer. So
thank you very much, and God forgive me for the bad dad joke, but who else to come and save us from our fiscal problems than the Nanaimo Fire and Rescue? Councillor Martman.
Thank you. This one, I would like to move the motion that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend the Council add a manager to the Vancouver Island Emergency Response Academy position to the 2022-2026 financial plan effective February 1st, 2022.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. I have in order, unless you want to speak to it, Councillor Martman.
I just think I wanted to move the motion because of my background in insurance and emergency response, and I just think it's a no-brainer.
Councillors Turley, Thorpe, and Bonner, in that order, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Chief Doyle. Are there other facilities within the province that do this type of training? And the reason I'm asking is that one of the business challenges, of course, is success usually breeds competition. And, so if there's a bunch already lined up to become part of it, we need to get our feet on the ground and start running with this. But
so in terms of, VR is an accredited institution through the Pro Board, so that's an international certification. There are currently 3 in the province right now, which is the Justice Institute of BC, and ourselves, and College of the Rockies in Cranbrook. By all indications, Pro Board isn't going to be giving out these certifications. They're just not, especially to fire departments. We're in a unique situation where we're one of a very few fire departments, maybe the only, I can't actually speak that, but we're one of very few fire departments that have received this accreditation. That was from our a couple of chiefs ago with his history, and he was on the Pro Board board, and he really knew the ins and outs. And so we are one of the very few that have this accreditation. So it basically is certification. When you get training, it holds you to standards, job performance requirements, and that all those are audited. And so we have to go through an audit to ensure that we're following those standards. So there's a lot of safety quality that departments get from that, as opposed to just made up training that doesn't necessarily follow standards. So so that it is, I wouldn't say we have the market cornered by any measure. The Justice Institute of BC is a big accredited body, but we certainly are a little bit more of a customized boutique model that's able to work with our customers on a closer level. So getting back to them quicker, providing student records quicker, customizing our dates for course offerings. We're a little bit more nimble. So as a result, you're seeing departments really want to work with us. So.
Oh, that's the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, no, welcome.
Councillor Thorpe.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I just felt I had to congratulate Chief Doyle on his creativity in arguing that hiring another staff will actually decrease property taxes. I've never seen that before. Yeah. And I'm sure other departments in the city are listening carefully and thinking, how can we do something similar next year? But I appreciate the work of the Response Academy, and I agree with your business case, and good for you. So I'll happily support this.
Through Your Worship, Councillor Thorpe, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. And further to Councillor Thorpe, we would have probably had these meetings done a couple of weeks ago if all the departments came forward like this. My question actually isn't so much related to the work as the side economic benefits of fire departments coming here to do the learning. Do they come down for a day, or do they come down for a couple of days? And do we have any figures on what they spend in addition to what they spend for fees here?
Through Your Worship, Councillor Bonner. So currently we actually don't bring a lot of the fire departments to our community. We do bring some. We generate, before COVID and before we had the issues with our training tower that is going to be repaired, we generate a small amount of revenue bringing firefighters here to be trained. One of the good things about our model is that we have instructors that we're able to deploy outwards, which is an enormous cost savings for the departments that are receiving the training. It speaks to the business case about our training tower when I was advocating to repair that and keep our firefighters here to get to be trained, because you eliminate travel time, all those costs of training in your community. So that's what we're able to do, is deploy instructors outwardly and support their departments in lowering their costs by keeping their firefighters in their community. So yeah, so we send instructors, and then again, because we're accredited, we send independent evaluators too.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor? Any contrary? I would be astonished. Thank you. Motion carries. Thank you, Chief Doyle.
Thank you.
Ms. Mercer?
Our next business case is for the RCMP additional bike patrol units. So this would add 4 additional bike patrol members, and it would target the downtown area and work proactively in an outreach capacity with the community outreach team. And that they're looking at adding these officers with an April 1st implementation date and an approximate 0.3% increase for 2022.
Superintendent.
Excuse me, Your Worship. I don't think that's fair having to follow Chief Doyle.
Duly noted.
Just want to remind people I brought chocolates. Yeah. In terms of this business case, we know that there's the downtown business security plan that is in progress, and we see this as informing mayor and council about a possible solution that may be used to address this. As you're aware, we do have the bar watch as well as the bike patrol, and this would fit somewhat in between those 2 roles, in that it would be dedicated specifically to the downtown area on bike patrol. It would be 4 positions, and the idea would be that they would also be available as some of these special events roll out, that is that dedicated team who know the individuals that reside often within the downtown area, so that we have a consistent approach. We find with calls for service, when our general duty members go and are trying to have people compliant and deal with kind of public disorder issues, that the downtown residents have figured out if they delay long enough, we'll get a priority call and we'll have to leave, and then we start over again from the beginning. So having consistent individuals assigned to the area with additional training in terms of outreach, working with our provincial agencies would be very helpful in being more effective in addressing the downtown needs. We were looking at them being in a bike patrol format so that they can respond. And the reason for 4 is so that one team can be continuously present if the other team is working with an individual that causes them to, say, go back to the detachment, et cetera, so that we have a continuous presence.
Thank you. Mr. Ridolph, if I may ask a question, what's the timing on the study, security?
Thank you, Your Worship. The consultants are here again next week. They're really just now embarking full force on this. I don't know exactly the deliverable. I would expect to be within probably 3 months or so. This possibly could have come forward independent of that study. This is a police-driven thing. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how this aligns with the recommendations from the consultant, which will factor in police bylaw and private security considerations. So, I mean, there's two issues here. One is there is that study that will inform how this would meet the recommendations of that strategy, which you'll receive in a couple of months. And second, this is a tax increase piece, so we weren't expecting necessarily a decision today on this, but this is the opportunity to understand that. So it was, this is a companion to, but not necessarily dependent on the security plan for the downtown recommendations. I believe the RCMP would probably come forward with this anyway. But because there is that companion piece, there will be, unfortunately, more costs I would expect attached to that review. So, be it for bylaw officers or security or something that's more permanent. So, that's just the information we can provide today.
Thank you, Councillor Martman, and then Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. I'm just trying to understand. So this isn't actually hiring 4 more police officers. This is I don't know what the proper word would be, but
It would be 4 additional police resources being required, but they would be staffed in a position where they are allocated to the downtown. So we might see some of the bike patrol members moving through that position so that we have a continuous presence. Because if someone goes away on holiday, we don't want a vacancy. So we would be backfilling it in that way. So that's why I'm phrasing it as positions instead of members, if that provides any clarity.
Okay, because I'm looking at the increase in general revenue. And so I'm trying to understand, we're not actually hiring more bodies, or we are hiring?
We are, hopefully.
So although right now, we need the security downtown and the bike patrols and community outreach, et cetera, what happens if our city becomes clean, green, and we don't have these issues? Now we've got 4 more members on top of the 15 we agreed to at the beginning of the term?
So you're correct that the city agreed to do 3 members for the next 5 years. Our metrics are showing that we're understaffed already. So if the city got to a point where those members were redundant, then obviously we wouldn't be seeking additional members. We're not there now.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm understanding the need for this, and I see that. I remember when we first started in this job, we were told by the superintendent at that time that we couldn't have anybody arrested, and we couldn't dictate where police services are allocated to. And I think we can't still have people arrested, which is fine. But this looks like we're saying how police services are going to be allocated, and I'm fine with the bike patrol, the ex-bike patrol down there. I'm just wondering, in the event that something happens a year and a half from now, you're the one in charge of where they get allocated to, so that could just as easily disappear?
I agree with the comments made by my predecessor, Superintendent Miller, in that the allocation of police resources are ultimately my decision. At this time, I want to commit that we look at this for a series of years, and that would be something that could be open for discussion. But I would like to see what happens if we do an invested project where we can measure it and see the end result. And my hope would be that actually shows the true need and the benefit of it. I've worked bike patrol myself in dedicated resources, dedicated areas, and it's rewarding to see some of the changes that can come from that. And in no way am I diminishing our bike patrol. Their needs have outgrown that unit. They've been in existence for a number of years and had no additional resources. They went from being able to do patrols through the community to being almost completely dedicated at this point to supporting bylaws and the businesses as they try and operate with significant pressures of the downtown individuals who are living without homes.
Thank you.
Your Worship, Councillor Armstrong's had her hand up for a while too. It's a little hard to see it, but.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. Councillor Bonner sort of touched on what I was looking at too, because, I was always told, and I guess obviously this has changed, that councils cannot state where they want the bodies to go. Like if we wanted 4 to go to school patrols, we were told, no, we can't do that. So obviously something's changed for that. But I do have a concern when I hear that it's just going to be focused on the downtown area, because we're hearing from other parts of the community that would also benefit from the bike patrols. So would that be open to moving those people around, or that group around, as need arises, such as the Labio area, terminal area? Is that available to us, or is it strictly just to support the downtown?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Armstrong, the needs that we were looking at were in the downtown area, looking at what is viable with a bike unit because of their travel time and the requirement for infrastructure. There are times and places where it does make sense to pick them up and relocate them to an area and use that, but they do require some additional support services, so that's why we were focusing on the downtown area. But that doesn't mean we can't look at a targeted project type approach for some areas as well.
And as a follow-up, is it possible to get this in writing? And again, it's like Councillor Bonner says, right now you're here, but things happen.
Yeah.
And a new superintendent comes in and says, no, I'm moving those bodies to the watch because they're needed there. So I believe in adding more police officers regardless, because looking at the stats, we're a good 50 under any, and we're the second highest crime rate on the island and very high up there for all of the province. So I think we're severely under-resourced. My just concern is that if we decide that we're going to do this and it's going to be with the assumption that it's going to go to bike patrol, somebody else comes and moves it, then it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth that it's not being fair to the council of the day that approved it.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Armstrong. I'm comfortable committing for 2 years with follow-up discussions with council if the circumstances change. And that would also then, I think, tie into Councillor Martman's comments around, well, what about additional resources? I think signing them into perpetuity would not make sense, but I think a specific term and a reassessment makes sense.
Thank you. I'm totally supportive of this, and I would like to actually see more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, personally, I think the bike patrol units are extremely valuable, and to me, they're like community police officers. My question's a very simple one, Superintendent. You're asking for 4 additional patrol members. How many do we have now in the bike patrol unit?
We currently have 8, including the corporal.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, those numbers have been the same, I believe, for the last 12 years.
Thanks. Councillor
Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Superintendent Fletcher. So my question here, and you've probably already answered it, but with my gray hair, I'm having challenges understanding. So is the intent on this to have additional hours of coverage within the downtown, or fuller coverage?
It would be a combination of both. Right now, our bike patrol spends a good portion of their time starting very early in the morning, and they require a sufficient number, so their afternoon presence is diminished as a result of that. They do reschedule for evening events as needed, and they also participate strongly with the bar watch, but it's that constant push and pull of when are they needed.
Okay.
So it would be additional hours.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I think this is one that Council will have to consider very carefully, because I think it speaks to everything that's important about our downtown, and in terms of ensuring prosperity for that part of our community and security for our citizens. So we'll leave it at that. I think we heard the hint that we'll have to make this decision fairly quickly.
Thank you.
Ms. Mercer.
So our next business case relates to the Aquatics Development Plan, and this is to support adequate supervision of 90+ staff and provide the necessary resources to create and sustain an enhanced team-based work and place environment. So there are a couple options available to Council. One is to fully implement the plan in 2022, and this would have a approximate 0.26% increase for 2022. Option 2 is to have a phased implementation of the plan, and that spreads it over 3 years with an approximate 0.12% increase for 2022. And then the third option is have staff go back and see what they can do to try to make this a cost-neutral solution. But the caveat with that is a reduction in service levels within the Recreation and Culture Department may be necessary to provide the support needed to aquatics. So those are your options. Ms. Wark did speak to this last week, but if you had any additional questions, I believe she is here. Nope, she's here to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Ms. Wark, and welcome. Any questions for Ms. Wark? Councillor Gesselbrock.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just curious,
you know, from the last presentation, there sounds like there's a gap in some supervisory roles in that. Just how is this tied into, and how would the Parks strategic plan, which I believe is being part of the Reimagine process, inform this and the direction around service levels and that?
Thank you. Through your mayor to Councillor Gesselbrock. So far, the preliminary results from the Reimagine process have indicated to us that the community wants more aquatic services. They'd like to see more lessons, more programs, more services at waterfronts. And so that's what's coming from the community. In order for us to provide more, we need to right size our operation right now so that we can actually handle properly what we're currently offering to the community.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think there's been, you know, quite a few requests in Parks and Recreation in general, and I'm just curious, sort of like the strategic plan that is coming out, that's, you know, being informed with the feedback from the community, just sort of where the level of demands are for the different areas, so that just to help inform, you know, my decisions. So thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. In reading the business plan, you're looking to increase the head lifeguards to basically full-time off deck by adding 190 hours per week. So I'm guessing that's over a number of lifeguards, head lifeguards. So are we then putting back more lifeguards on to take over their on-deck time? Is that the gist of this? Other than training, and I see other things in there.
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor Bonner, that's correct. So it would be having more lifeguards on deck so that the head guards could be off deck performing their supervisory, leadership, mentorship aspects of their role. Despite the fact that this plan is to have them off deck 100% of the time, it is inevitable that they probably will end up on deck some of the time.
Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea from a supervisor point of view, at least to see what it used to be like. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I don't see any further hands. Ms. Work, thank you.
Okay, our next business case is a lead supervisor for parks, trails, and natural areas. So again, providing additional resources to proactively manage park assets in the planning and strategic function. The option here is to add the position effective February 15th, and general revenue would be the funding source at a 0.17% approximate tax increase. And it does include some one-time capital costs in 2022 that we wouldn't need in future years. So I'll hand it over to Mr. Groot, and he can tell you all the things you need to know about this one.
Mr. Groot.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yeah, it's an option and an opportunity for us to be able to provide capacity back to the manager of park operations around that strategic management and that strategic planning, and being able to focus again more on the natural areas and natural area management plans. So the lead supervisor really is intended to deal with those day-to-day issues, deal with the crews, deal with some of those public responses directly related to operations. And then, like I said before, the manager then can focus on those management roles.
Any questions? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Groot. I'm probably misunderstanding this, but when I think parks, trails, and natural areas, I think of vegetation and outdoor facilities, not indoor. So can you clarify that for me first? And then...
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. So I won't repeat the part about me not understanding, but
it's my turn for that.
Yeah. My understanding of parks, trails, and natural areas is areas of vegetation, sports fields, not permanent turf, that type of thing. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, through Your Worship, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so that leads to my next question. That is, given my background, I have to assume that work being done on these type of facilities is seasonal? And what would the supervisor be doing during the off-season, I guess is the way of putting it?
Through your worship, sorry, as I answered that, I'm like, oh no, wait a minute. Sorry. So the parks component is also, so park operations is made up of 4 different sections. So it's, there's a utility section which deals with a lot of the underground infrastructure within the fields, irrigation. They deal with a lot of gates, fencing, a lot of those fix-it things that just happen in all of our locations. Then we also have the trails division, which deals with all of our trails. We have the horticulture division, so that's all of our downtown high-end horticulture and then horticulture across the city. And then we have our neighborhood parks and turf fields, sport fields, natural turf. So the supervisor is also going to be responsible, it will be responsible for all 4 of those sections, not just the outside natural areas, but all 4 of the parks operational sections.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. As part of the business plan, one of the bullet items is a shift from a reactive to a proactive maintenance model. It's always a good idea. But I always consider that a way of eventually saving money. It's better to fix something just before it breaks, as opposed to when it's broken and breaks something else. Would we expect to see some savings in that department based on this new way of doing things?
Through your worship to Councillor Bonner, what we would see is similar to many of the operational departments in the city is it's not a lack of resourcing, but there's a capacity issue with current resourcing levels. So what a position like this also would be able to do, aside from the coordination of day-to-day tasks, is really looking at how to reduce duplication and redundancy in operations across parks, trails, and natural areas. So it might not be a savings that we would see, but it would be a redeployment or a reassignment of how staff are currently being used. And then maybe as a result of that, there isn't a request for additional resourcing or positions because we've streamlined some of those operations.
Thank you.
Don't see any further questions. Mr. Groot, thank you very much. Ms. Mercer?
Our last business case is for a parks maintenance worker for playgrounds, and this is to support enhanced playground maintenance, moving towards a more proactive maintenance model. So this would be a February 15th implementation date with a general tax increase of approximately 1.6% for 2022, and then again with some one-time costs in 2022 that we would see reduced in 2023. So Mr. Groot can speak to this one as well.
Fair to say, Mr. Groot, with COVID, we've seen a significant increase in use.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. That's absolutely correct. So it's a dedicated position to the more than 75 to 90 playgrounds that we have across the community. And past models and current model is we have a position that isn't just 100% focused on the inspection, maintenance, repair of the playgrounds. And it very much is a reactive position currently. Yes, we have scheduled inspections, and yes, we have those ongoing programs, but this position would not be focused on anything else but that inspection, maintenance, repair of our playground. So essentially, to really oversimplify it, start at the north end, work through everything, and then finish in the south end over a period of time and basically start again. And it also allows for our destination parks. We're really trying to get to a point, especially through the busy seasons, where we have a Monday morning inspection, we have a Friday afternoon inspection to get it ready for the weekend, and then we have another Monday morning inspection, so that we ensure that the customers and the patrons and the visitors that come for the weekend, it's a safe experience. And then again, that Monday morning, we come back and we do another inspection to make sure that nothing's occurred due to an extreme amount of use. Smithvale Sutton Playground is a great example of that, and the future upgrades there are going to increase the demand for a position like this, absolutely. And that's only speaking about one of our destination parks in our community.
Not seeing any questions.
Your Worship.
Councillor Bonner, sorry.
You first.
Worship, I was just going to say, I've encouraged the Parks Rec and Culture Division to come forward with asks this year. Since I've been here, this is the first time they've stood back and let others take priority. And this was their turn. You're not seeing things from the engineering and public works this year. And they're simply laying it on the line that they're trying to keep up with the workload. And certainly on the aquatic side, you've heard that story. And similarly with the parks, we have had feedback that sometimes our facilities look a little tired, and you hear that about boulevards and that type of thing. So we're trying to find a way to address some of these things. So I just wanted to say I'm part of the responsible for them coming forward with these, and I certainly support and encourage them to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Councillor Bonner and then Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Pride of place is important, and I think driving down the streets and looking at the parks is that they be tickety-boo and quite nice is really high up on my priorities, I can tell you that. I do have a question regarding under the financial analysis of the business plan. The additional annual costs are estimated at $32,600 in 2022 and $42,200 in 2022 for fleet unit. That's two prices for one unit, or are you buying two units, or is that a mistake?
Through the chair to Councillor Bonner. No, so we have other expenses that total $32,600 in 2022, and then in the following year, oh, we got a typo there. Then in 2023, the other expenses for the position go up. So it's not just the fleet unit, there's a fleet unit, there's training, telephone, materials, supplies, because as part of bringing this position on, they would need materials and supplies to do their job, and it's a partial year, of course, in 2022, and then a full year in 2023.
So the second 2022 is actually 2023?
It should be 2023, okay. Yes, we've all missed the typo, sorry about that.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Groot. I wonder if you could refresh my memory on the approximate number of playground parks this would apply to and how the maintenance was covered in the past.
Through your worship to Councillor Turley. So we have around 90 playgrounds across the organization or across the community. And so we have a parks operations carpentry position right now that their primary focus is this, but that position is also responsible for other park structures, park shelters, and some park signage. So responding to those inspection or work orders is also part of their role. And it's just not being able to get ahead of that inspection list. So there's a lot of time where we're behind on making sure that this week's inspection, or that we're supposed to be at this spot in Central Nanaimo doing these inspections. So it's really, we're never able to catch up with having a singular a resource based on some of the other reactive work orders that come up. So what this would do is we'd still have that parks operations carpentry position doing some of the work, but it would allow for, again, getting ahead of the curve on some of those other jobs and work orders, whereas this position, that's all this position would do. It would just inspect, maintain, repair playgrounds. That's it. It sounds super simple, but that's what the position would do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Turley. Not seeing any other hands. Mr. Groot, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the next slides, so we finished with our business cases. The next slides are, several of them are potential reductions to the budget. Some are additional asks. And so we'll go through those, with the first one being the Climate Action Reserve. Now, currently we have $165,000 in annual contributions to this reserve. Council has the option to either keep it at 165 or reduce the annual contribution. And the example given in this slide is to reduce it to $100,000 per year, and that would give us an approximate 0.05% reduction. I can provide more information on that, but I think I've talked about it a few times, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Not seeing any, Ms. Mercer.
Yep.
Councillor Turley, sorry.
That's okay. I'm easy to miss. To your worship, to Ms. Mercer, My question is, of the 165,000 that goes in annually, what are the kind of withdrawals coming out of there? Is it accumulating rapidly, or are we using some of it?
I will let Ms. Fulla answer that because I see she has the reserve spreadsheet up.
Through the chair to Councillor Turley. So this is a new reserve, so it's actually a combination of the Sustainability Reserve and the Emission Reduction Reserve. So over the years, we've funded a variety of projects from there. We bought electric vehicles for our building inspectors. We've done a number of studies on energy improvements for facilities, as well as energy improvements to facilities. We also had the grant program that we did through Development Services. I believe it was called Clean BC, that was funded from there. So right now we're looking at an opening balance in 2022 of about $559,000. And I do know that our building department, Ms. McCaskill's area, has a number of projects coming forward with energy improvements for facilities that could more than use up the funding in that reserve if we wanted to proceed with all those energy projects.
Thank you.
Our next slide is speaks to the snow and ice control budget, or SNCC. And so currently we have a $95,000 increase to the budget for 2022, and that's based on a 3-year actual cost average, and that includes snow removal for both Parks and Rec and Culture, as well as Public Works and Engineering. And just a reminder, we do have the SNCC reserve, and that has a balance of $1.2 million. So if we have a really large snow year and we eat up all of that budget and surplus isn't sufficient to cover it, we can go into this reserve to fund any shortfalls. So the options available are just keep it as it is at $975,000, or you can reduce it back to 2021 budget levels, which was $880,000. So remove that $95,000 increase, and that results in a property taxation reduction of approximately 0.08%.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. The reserve isn't what we actually spend on. Like, I know eventually it would be, but we actually also have a budget item for snow and removal of, I think it's 800,000 as well.
So for 2020, through your worship to Councillor Bonner, for 2022, we have a $975,000 budget. And what the suggestion is that we would go back and keep it at 2021 level of 880,000. And, you know, that if we had a big snow year, we could look at surplus first and then this reserve second if we needed to.
Okay, thank you. I'm fine with moving that motion.
Any discussion? All those optimistically in favor? Any opposed? Councillors Thorpe and Brown. Thank you very much. Motion carries.
Our next item is relating to pavement preservation. So we have included a $50,000 increase for pavement preservation in the 2022 budget. And the options here are we can maintain the budget as it is with the $50,000 inclusion, or we can eliminate the increase. And that would result in approximate 0.04% tax reduction. So I believe there's somebody here to talk to this if you have any questions.
Councillor Bonner, you left over from before? No.
Given the opportunity to ask a question.
Mr. Elliott, welcome.
How did the $50,000 get into the budget in the first place? Was that from a previous year?
Thank you. Through your worship to Councillor Bonner. This was an addition to look at further ways to extend the life of our asphalt surfacing. So the idea here would be, as I mentioned in my last presentation to you, that our roads are deteriorating faster than our budgets can keep up with the repairs to them. And this is due to a number of things: increases in the asphalt binders, fuel, costs around that. So what this $50,000 would be used for are technologies such as microsurfacing, crack sealing, things like that to extend the life of the roads to the longest life we can get out of them.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Elliott, thank you very much. I must admit, given the presentation we had earlier, not today, but around the state of our pavement.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Mercer?
Okay, so our next item relates to the landscaping for the Boxwood Detention Pond. So like I said, we have a $67,000 increase to the budget this year for contracted landscaping for the newly completed Boxwood Detention Pond. So your options here are to maintain the budget and keep the $67,000 in there, or option 2 is to remove the landscaping for this detention pond, and the expected taxation reduction is approximately at 0.06%. And Mr. Groot is here to speak to it if anybody has questions.
Mr. Groot.
Thanks, Your Worship. When we were here last speaking about the detention pond, Councillor Bonner had asked the question around stream keepers potentially doing this work. And so we actually reached out to some of our partners in the community, and I just have an email here from one of our staff, and this wouldn't fall under stream keepers and their scope. They really do focus on fish-bearing waterways and the restoration thereof. But there may be an opportunity to look at some of the, or work with some of the wetland stewardship groups, but not have them take it on as a complete responsibility, just based on, there still are a number of years to work, with this location to make sure that it's operating properly. And, we do that through in-house operations or contracted service. It's a great opportunity to work with these kind of groups in regard to education and training and just stewardship of the land or this kind of asset. But for a group to take this on based on that, anticipated annual dollar to do the work, it's just not feasible to hand them over. And then there could be, that labor relation component around work that staff or whatever should be doing compared to having a community group do it or what have you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, my comment was meant to be directed towards the last item, but
Sorry.
That's okay. I think it applies to this one as well, and it's simply this, that I think, in my opinion, removing or reducing the budget for this would be an example of penny wise, pound foolish, and so I won't be supporting any change to the budget. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you. Same for me. That's third time this month, Councillor Thorpe.
3 times.
Yeah, it seems to be that we've already done the work, and then to just let it go. The only thing that would convince me otherwise is if we knew that the development that was going to be taking place in that area was going to pay to put it all back together again, and I don't think that's the case, is it?
No. Through Your Worship, no. No. I will expand a little bit on the 67,000. Again, that's an estimated cost. It's not an actual cost. So, over the coming year, 12 months from now, we'd be able to have this conversation in regard to, how did the year go in regard to maintaining the detention pond? Was the $67,000 enough, or was it too much? Were we able to leverage those funds for, other wetlands or natural area maintenance? So it'll be good to see how this, the coming 12 months goes in regard to this asset and other similar assets.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Mr. Groot. So 67,000, I'm assuming, applies to covering the whole detention pond area. Is there any thought being given to doing half one year and the other half the next year?
Through Your Worship, to Councillor Turley. It's a question. I don't have a good question. I don't have an answer for that, but again, I absolutely could find that out. I mean, strategies regarding maintenance, there is an opportunity for phasing like that, but I don't want to say yes without having an absolute answer.
Thank you.
Mr. Groot, if I may, references newly established native plants and trees, etc. Who paid for the ones that are there, and how much did it cost? Do you have any idea?
through your worship, or to your worship, not through your worship, but I don't have the answer in regard to the initial costs, but it would have been the initial developer. There would have been a 1 or 2 year maintenance period. They would have covered all those costs, and then, you know, that maintenance period ends and it gets handed back to the city for responsibility. But I could come back to you with those total dollar amounts, absolutely.
I wouldn't be wrong, though, in assuming we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars.
Oh, yeah, without question. Yeah, tens of thousands, probably more likely.
Thank you. And Mr. Sims?
Yeah, capital project, yeah. Not a developer project. Oh, sorry, apologies. It wasn't a developer project. It was a capital project.
Okay, thank you. No further questions. Thank you very much.
Our next slide talks about the public art maintenance budget. So this was a new budget for 2022, and it was $25,000 to ensure the longevity of the city's public art collection. Now, the options available here are to maintain the budget as it is or remove the $25,000 from the budget. And this would result in an approximate 0.02% reduction.
I must
Ms.
say,
Ward is here to answer any questions you have on that.
I must say it would be pretty inconsistent with our desire to improve public spaces and get people back onto normal living, not to maintain the very art that we've paid for. But Ms. Ward, thank you. Anything you wish to add to this? I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay.
If you have nothing to add, thank you very much. Appreciated. Excuse me.
Okay, our next item relates to the urban design roster. So we increased this project budget by $25,000, and we were to come back during the financial plan deliberations to determine whether we wanted to do this for the urban design roster initiative. So what your options are: maintain the budget with the $25,000 in it, or reduce the public art project. Now, this doesn't have any taxation funding. This is just an exercise in how we can reallocate some funds in the background to fund other projects. So there is no tax impact, but we're happy to answer any questions that you have on this.
Not seeing any.
Okay.
Thank you.
We've kind of already discussed this slide in some detail, but we can further discuss it. There's three possible options. One, to fund the $60,000 for these two events. One is from taxation, and that would have approximate 0.05% increase in 2022. And option number two is to reallocate the $60,000 from the current $150,000 budget line for downtown grant events budgets. And the third option is just do not add anything to the budget, and you wouldn't have anything for these two events.
Not Councillor Thorpe, then Councillor Bonner.
Thanks, Your Worship. Further to Councillor Turley's question and comments earlier, I don't think I'll be prepared to support option number two. I think our downtown grants budget is important with a number of other events that will draw from that. I also won't support option number three, which brings us back to option number one and brings us back to taxation. Councillor Turley sort of asked this, and I'm not sure that I heard the answer correctly, but I'm interested in options or opportunities for partnering with other groups, specifically school district and SFN, perhaps VIU, not just in terms of organizing or planning the event, but actual funding partners. And I'm wondering if staff can comment if that has been investigated, or is it an option that we could investigate, which might reduce our financial contribution and therefore reduce our taxation impact.
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's really Councillor Thorpe. Certainly something that could be further investigated, but I do want to confirm that this year, this past September, when we held the first ever event, we did have both in-kind and monetary contributions from our partners. who came to the table and assisted in putting on the event that day. So there is certainly opportunity to continue that. As you know, we didn't have any money in the budget this year, so it was very much trying to pull resources together to put this event together on a relatively short notice. The hope is that this money will allow us to do a little bit more long-term planning and have those discussions. So as these programs evolve, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonner, and then
Thank you, Worship. I'm fine with option one, increasing. I think we should be increasing our budget for this type of thing considerably. But I look back to say the Truth and Reconciliation Commission happened 50 years ago. Today, we would have a budget that talked about events in the downtown area, and it would include both of these in that budget. So option two would be where we would be now today. And just to remind Councillor Turley that both the events of National Indigenous Peoples Day and the Truth and Reconciliation Day bring people downtown, just generally different people. So the fact that, I was downtown for both these events, I went for lunch afterwards, the whole bit. And so I think they're both economic generators. And so I think this question here is now, do we just want to increase our budget, which I'm fine with, because I think the more money we spend in allowing people to come downtown, the better. So it's not really either way. I'm fine with either one of the options. It's just not number three.
Councillor Martman.
Thank you. And speaking further to what Councillor Bonner is saying, I like the idea of it just being in the budget, period. This is a reconciliation day we know historically going forward. And I think that's something that we have to look at, because I do agree with Councillor Turley with the funds of $150,000 that do get used up for events other than this. We should not be depleting that. So I'm definitely in favor when we go to vote of option one.
I'm not seeing any further speakers, and I'm not seeing anyone actually make the motion, but I think council seems to be reasonably clear on it.
Your Worship, if I can ask just a process question myself. We've lost 3 members of council now, and we didn't have it scheduled past this time. You have 2 options. One is to carry forward and complete your discussion this morning, and the second is to recess or reconvene this conversation for the balance of these subjects and then go back to it for next Friday. So I'm just mentioning that as sort of given the time. I was wondering what your council's preference is.
Councillor Bonner?
There's a significant amount of things that we're going to be talking about later on, and this meeting could go to 3. I'd be willing to have it again. I'm late for a lunch appointment, but I'll stick around if it's necessary. I'll just tell them I just can't make it. But
Ms. Gurry.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Further to that point from Councillor Bonner and Mr. Rudolph, I would suggest we adjourn this meeting, not recess it, and the meeting on the 19th, that we start with this subject and then carry on. And in that way, all of the decisions that you've delayed to the 19th on these slides today, you can deal with those and the ones that you haven't been able to give a chance. And we make sure that the schedule is set for a longer amount of time. I'm not sure how much time we allotted to the 19th, but we certainly didn't give enough time for today's meeting, so our apologies for that.
Thank you. I'm just checking. So we're scheduled from 9 till noon on the 19th, and my inclination would be to have all of council here if possible, rather than be running on 2/3. These are important items, and I'm looking at them, and significant in terms of cost. So without further ado, then we will ask for I think straightforward adjournment. There's no other business. Oh, pardon me. We've got all the reports too as well. So
Yeah, Your Worship, so the reports were attached to the slide items, so they will be brought forward to that next meeting as well. So I don't believe there was any other business, and there's no members of the public here for questions.
Motion for adjournment. Moved, Councillor Martman, seconded Councillor Bonner. All those in favor, thank you. And thank you very much to staff this morning for all your work, and particularly Ms. Fulla and Ms. Mercer, who have borne the largest burden today.
Thank you.